Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Carolinas Plastics Recycling Council 2021 annual meeting. For those of you who don't know, my name is Wendy Worley. I am the Recycling and Materials Management Section Chief for North Carolina DEQ. I'm really glad that you all are able to join us today. We have a very interesting panel and robust panel here today. Want to just tell you briefly what CPRC is for those of you who aren't familiar with the organization. It is a two-state organization that supports the plastics recycling industry in North and South Carolina. And it was formed back in 2021. Excuse me, 10 years ago, 2011. So this is our 10-year anniversary, as a matter of fact. And the goal is to help grow the recycling plastics industry in the two states, to grow jobs and to increase recovery rates across the two states. It's in recognition of the really robust plastics industry in the two states already, and we would like to see that grow. So that is the goal and the purpose of the CPRC. And we have a really wonderful agenda here for you today, just to talk about the issues facing the industry and how we are moving forward as an organization and as an industry. So I'd like to thank our colleagues in the Department of Commerce in South Carolina, along with all of my staff who really did put a lot of work into planning the sessions and bringing this content for you today. So thank you to all of those folks. A few housekeeping real quick. As we get started, many of you I'm sure are very familiar with these webinars, but just to get a few of these housekeeping items squared away for us all, so we're all together. If you happen to have any computer audio issues, we suggest that you can switch to your telephone instead. You can go to the audio tab in the webinar controls box and click the phone as you see on the screen. The phone number and code will be shown for you to use to access the webinar. And in addition, if you go back to the meeting invite, it also includes a phone number and access code in that email. So those are alternative ways to listen to the audio if you happen to be having difficulty. We will be recording these sessions and we'll send the recordings out to the participants after the session ends. We'd also like to acknowledge that we are trying to prevent feedback and unnecessary background noise, so everyone has been brought in mute mode. Regardless, we'd still like to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the day and as we are listening to our presenters. So we encourage you to use the question box as you see highlighted on the screen. Please enter any questions that you have for the panelists in that questions and chat box, and we will be taking those in and facilitating those and asking that of our panelists as we go. So please do use this as an opportunity to participate and ask the questions that come to mind. With that, I would like to welcome our first speaker. We have invited Tanya Randall, who is Program Manager of STENA. She will be delivering an overview of the state of plastics recycling and give us a lot of broad information about plastics recycling. Tanya is a program manager for STENA. She does research and has more than 20 years of expertise in the field, and we really welcome Tanya as to lead us off in our event today.
Thanks, Wendy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And slides are showing. Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and we're right on time. Well done. And so I'm Tanya Randall, like Wendy said, from STENA Inc., which was formerly More Recycling, which was formerly More Recycling Associates. So we have a long line of working through plastics and information related to plastics. So I'm just going to advance my slides here. There we go. Just tell you a little bit about what we do. We have about 20 years of experience in the plastics recycling industry related to data collection and understanding the plastics that are collected for recycling in North America, and really working on providing data that helps better decision making around plastics and other issues related to sustainability or recycling. We work to foster collaborative problem solving with some of the efforts and projects that we're working on, such as our tubes project, where we're trying to get tubes transitioned from non-recyclable to recyclable on the market, and then also work to really raise awareness through the tools that we develop to really drive from a linear economy where we take, we make, and then we waste it, into a much more circular economy where everything, as much material as possible is kept in the system. And you can see across the bottom some of the tools that we have developed that are available, including the Buy Recycle Products Directory, Plasticmarkets.org, and the Post-Consumer Plastics Recycling Data Dashboard. And I'll be talking about a couple of these as I go along. So they asked me to kind of give a deep dive into plastics in general. So I'm going to give some really high level information and then let the rest of the panel later after me give you a little bit more detail about what's going on in the Carolinas specifically. So let's take a look at plastics generated by major category. This is from EPA data, and they divide things very broadly into three major categories. Durables, which are things that are intended to last more than 3 years. Non-durables, which are long-lasting items, but not necessarily with extended lifetime. So something that would be meant for multiple uses, but maybe doesn't last for 3 years. And then things like packaging and containers, which are not necessarily single use, but are often single use items, or items that are really just intended to contain a product and then be disposed of. And so a couple of notes on the side: construction, auto bumpers, and potentially other categories are not included in the EPA information because they're just not tracked. And so that would both increase the overall amount of material, so the 7.36 billion pounds of plastics that EPA is calculating, as well as probably the percent of durables, because those items would be considered durables. And then by EPA definition, just to give some examples of what non-durables are disposable diapers, trash bags, clothing, and footwear. So this is kind of the scope of what we're talking about. A lot of plastic out there, but only about 40% of it is packaging and containers, which is typically what we see going through a recycling stream. And so when you look at the material actually in the municipal solid waste, also from EPA, you can see that plastics are roughly 12% of the total. And if you think about it, we talk about plastic as a problem, and it is, and we have to manage how we are handling the plastic waste and try to get more of it back to be recycled. But you can see it's just a small percentage of the total, and it's equal to what you see from yard trimmings in MSW, and then much less than paper and food scraps, and then other recyclables you can see around the pie chart as well. And so then we talk about plastics in the recycling stream. It's an even smaller percentage of what's actually in the material mix going through a MRF. It's about 5% of the total, with fiber and cardboard products being the vast majority of material that a MRF sees, and then other recyclables like glass, metals, and other containers that are not plastic or fiber being, the other 25%. And so you can see that while plastic is something that's at the top of mind for a lot of people, it is a very small proportion of what's going through the MRF. And then as you break that down even further, you can see bottles, from the PET bottles, so water and soda bottles, HDPE bottles, so shampoo, conditioner, milk jugs, are about 75% of the plastic that we're seeing at the MRF. And this is national data, so it doesn't necessarily show exactly what you might see in a container deposit system, or what you would necessarily see in every state, but it's an average of all the material that we're tracking across the nation. And so when you look at deposit system states, you would see fewer bottles, HDPE and PET bottles, depending on what goes through the deposit, and you would see a different proportion of the breakout of curbside plastics. But I want to talk a little bit about the 3 through 7s, which is 15% of the total plastic, and how that teases out. And you'll see that the vast majority of that, or the majority of that at 33%, is polypropylene bottles. And then you'll see that there's still PET containers and bottles in that mix. There's still HDPE bottles and containers in that mix. And then there are other non-polypropylene, non-polyethylene, non-PET bottles and containers, including some bulky and polystyrene are in there as well. So you can see there's a pretty even mix of material, with polypropylene being the biggest share. It's not really the majority, the biggest share. And what we want to do in 2022 is work on new audits for mixed rigid and for HDPE bales to really see, as we've seen the shift over the last decade in the kind of plastics that are being produced and put on the market, how this graph in particular has shifted. So just talking a little bit about our recycling data dashboard and report. Every year we do an annual survey of reclaimers and recyclers, exporters and handlers of plastics across the United States and Canada, with a little bit of information coming from Mexico as well. And we track that, and we've been tracking that since about 2010 with lots of different categories, and we've been tracking other things previous to that. And we've been working with NAPCOR as well on the PET bottle data. And what we've done is this year is we created a dashboard where you can go and see the information pulled forward in a very easy to read and kind of digest sort of way, but there's also a report that you can find, and the website is here. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of points. We recycled about 5.1 billion pounds in 2019, which is the latest data that we have. We're working on 2020 right now. And you can see PET bottles, were 1.7 billion pounds. So that was over 20% of that. And then non-bottle rigids, which would be clamshells, tubs, other containers that are not bottles, was almost 1.3 billion pounds. And then HDPE bottles were just under 1 billion pounds. Film, which is polyethylene in this case, again, just under 1 billion pounds. And then polypropylene and other bottles were at 37, almost 35 million pounds, and then other plastics were about 17. And so you can see those different numbers as they come together, and you can see what we're seeing in the recycling, and that's also shown in the chart over time in a way that lets you see that we've been really flat since about 2017, and that's really when we began to see the impacts of China's national sword and the loss of a huge export market. So you can see a big drop between 2016 data and 2017 data. And from 2019 in particular, the non-bottle rigid category had an increase, while both HDPE and PET bottle recovery decreased. The amount generated didn't necessarily change, but the amount actually recovered for recycling did drop. And we also have seen this year, when the new PET recycling rate came out for 2020, I believe that has also seen a drop again this year. So, we're at a point where I think the data is showing that we're a little stagnant in our plastics recycling in some ways, especially with PET bottles. And so I think the idea that, how do we nudge that forward, and how do we get that restarted to really drive more collection and more recycling is a critical question to answer. And I did want to touch a little bit on film recycling data, because this doesn't necessarily go through the MRF. It's collected in very different ways. And both mixed retail, which is what you would see at the grocery store if you take it back to the bin, as well as their back of house material, as well as agricultural film, both saw increases, but we did see a net decrease in clear commercial film, which also drove down the film category in general, because it's just such a big share. But on the whole, we are seeing some positive notes in film recycling data. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about from our tool perspective is a resource that we have called Plasticmarkets.org, which is a resource for buyers and sellers that allows you, if you are looking to supply material into the industry, you can find buyers of all sorts of items, including some niche ABS and other materials that aren't necessarily commonly traded across the industry. But then also, if you are a buyer, list yourself so that suppliers can find you and really make that connection. It's completely free. If you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on my last slide, but it also shows our buy recycled products directory here, where you can find items that are actually made with recycled plastic, which is also a really critical element of driving demand for plastics, is actually buying the materials that are made with that recycled content. And so what we've got here is, it's two-sided. One is for personal use items that you might use in your home, as well as there's a commercial side for things that you would buy, recycling bins or crates and pallets or safety vests made with recycled content. And in this case, we're talking specifically about post-consumer plastics, meaning it's either come from a residential stream or a commercial stream having met its intended use. This does not include material made only with PIR. Now, if it has post-industrial resin in it, but it also has a post-consumer content, we will reference the PCR percentage in it, but we don't necessarily talk about the PIR material. And so you can search both by resin type, so you can see LDPE will give you trash can liners, or you can put in something like accessories and you can see glass frames or baby wraps or backpacks and that sort of thing. So we're constantly working to add more material and more products here so that you can search and find items that are actually made that we vet and confirm using post-consumer plastics. So I encourage you to check it out. And if you have any items that you have in your household or manufacturers that you know are making products with recycled plastic, please send it our way. We'd be happy to work on vetting that. So I want to take a little bit of a pause and talk a little bit about the evolution of plastic packaging and substitutes and how that ties back into the material collected, how it's processed, how it's recycled, and some of the challenges that we see in the marketplace. And I suspect some of the other speakers are going to touch on this, but it obviously continues to evolve. And I realized in looking back when I first remember my getting the first recycling bin in Hickory when I was a teenager, you know, it was really soda bottles, milk jugs, newspaper, and like tin cans, right? And maybe an aluminum soda can or whatever. And we've really seen this shift, especially in plastic packaging, to be smaller, thinner, lighter. And we've also seen this emergence of a lot more single, not just single use as in like a water bottle that you drink and then just, you know, recycle, but also single use travel where you've got instant coffees, you've got Pepto-Bismol chewables that are in individual little packs that you can pull off. We've seen a shift in baby food into pouches and coffee into you know, vacuum sealed bricks. And so we've seen this real shift in plastic packaging that has gotten lighter weight and a lot more efficient for what it does, given its size and shape. And if you look on the right-hand side, these are pictures that I actually took from the grocery store of all of the different ways that you can package laundry products. You've got pods that are in pouches, you've got liquid detergent in a bottle, you've got fabric softener sheets in, you know, paperboard boxes. And the MRF has to try to figure out how to message around that. If you say, you know, laundry items, do you mean the bottle? Do you mean the pouch? Do you mean the box? And you may mean all of them, or you may only mean 2 or 3 of them. And so I think there's a really critical piece of education and labeling that helps consumers understand what really goes in the bin in the first place, but also understanding that the net benefit of a lighter package may be more in its lightness and the greenhouse gas savings and the fact that it's recyclable, and how do we kind of find the best intersection for efficiency of a package versus its recyclability. And then I thought this was really interesting from at the bottom picture on the right, from left to right, that is an aluminum water bottle with a plastic cap, a plastic I guess probably a multi-material, multi-layer pouch of water. It's a carton of water with a plastic cap, and then it's a standard PET bottle with a plastic cap made from a different resin. And I was looking at it thinking, I don't know which one of those is really the best option from the life cycle of water and water packaging that would be the best one to choose if you wanted to limit your impact. And so I just thought it was really interesting to see them all lined up together, that the emergence of different packaging and the fact that water's even bottled or sold, and you know, you're not just drinking out of your tap as well. There's a lot of, I think, things to unravel when we're talking about that. So moving on, one of the things that we've been working on related to how packages that are emerging and working really closely with APR, the Association of Plastics Recyclers, through their design guides and their critical guidance testing, is as innovations come on and as packaging is changing and emerging and shifting, you know, what are the recyclability elements? What does it mean to be truly recyclable? And what we've really come to is it needs market compatibility and acceptance, meaning that it's something that can actually be used and there's demand for it. It needs to be able to be consolidated so that when you put it in a bin or a take back program, it's actually getting to the reclaimer that wants it. And then that recycling programs are able to tell their consumers to recycle it. And how all of those pieces work together is really critical to get to full recyclability. And what we did is we created a decision tree and a model that really helps you see how they're connected. So availability of recycling from the FTC perspective of the green guides and the 60% access, as well as the technical recyclability as it moves through the value chain, it's collected, it's sorted, and it can be reused and recycled, gives you this. And this is not necessarily finished or perfect, but it really is kind of a model that if you start on the left with the key pieces and you answer questions moving across through the middle, when you get to the right, you should be able to say that you've got full recyclability because you've checked the boxes for program availability for consumers, you've checked the boxes for market compatibility and acceptance, and you've checked the boxes for consolidation for market. And we've been working really closely, like I said, both with APR and ISRI and other organizations to really help move the conversation around recyclability, and in this case, specifically to plastic squeeze tubes, how we move from left to right. And one of the other things that I wanted to say is this doesn't necessarily have to deal with just being able to be curbside collected. One of the really critical pieces for film is retail drop-off for consumers to be able to take their packages back and how that all works in. And if you want it to be truly recyclable, having a take-back program counts as that access, even if you're not able to recycle it curbside. And just, I think, wanted to touch on that that's a really important piece that could be replicated for other materials if the curbside collection isn't really the best path, although it is not necessarily an easy path forward either, because you really have to get enough locations on board to be able to take the material and really work on that access for consumers. And so to wrap up, we need solutions at the scale of the problem. And I think that a lot of people have seen this presented in different ways. And basically both of these charts show the same thing. We've got a lot of plastic being generated, being put on the market and being, put out, and not necessarily a lot of recycling capacity for all the plastic that's coming out. And so what we've really got to do is figure out how we close the gap between what's being produced and generated and how we recycle and capture more of it. And there's a lot of different options and opportunities. And I think that we're at the point now, especially with the US Plastics Pact, of talking about the kinds of plastics that maybe aren't appropriate for the market anymore. And how do we make that move away from those things that are just too challenging and somewhat unnecessary because suitable alternatives exist, to really be able to make these lines, the recycling capacity grow and the generation and the recycling rates kind of get closer together. And I suspect that some of the other panelists are actually going to talk about that as well. So I'm not really going to dive too deep into that. But the last thing that I really wanted to talk about is the Circularity in Action website that we've created and that we're working on a second iteration of, that really helps consumers, businesses, and the players all around the value chain figure out where you fit and what actions that you can do that really help you drive circularity. And that is kind of my final point here, is everybody has a role in the circular economy, whether you're a consumer, a government, a business, a hauler, a recycler, a virgin material producer. How you put things on the market, is it designed properly? I'm sure APR will talk a little bit about design for recycling guidance. Are you using recycled content? Are we buying products made with recycled content? Are we recycling properly? Are we paying attention to the education and what it says that goes in the bin versus wish cycling? And our consolidators and sorters and MRFs and reclaimers and brokers actually providing a feedstock that can be put back into the economy as well. So on that, I'm going to wrap it up. Here is my contact information. Feel free to send me an email if you have any specific questions. And I think, Wendy, we have a couple of minutes to be able to answer a couple of questions.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much, Tanya. I appreciate that. And I do have a couple of questions that have been coming in. Want to allow about 5 minutes for us to go over that. One of the questions came in. You noted early on in your slides that the recovery rates for plastics in 2019 has actually decreased from the previous year, and you sort of touched on that a little bit, but I wonder if we could spend some more time and talk about what you think the cause of that drop is and ways we might be able to improve it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at this chart in particular, we've been relatively flat since 2017. And I will say one of the challenges with the national survey is that we don't necessarily get answers from everyone, and not everybody tells us everything. And so I would say really the big drop was 2016 to 2017, and we've held relatively steady over the last couple of years. But export markets being shut down and really not having the domestic capacity to take the mix of material that we're generating and producing is really, I think, what is that's made kind of the flat line over the last couple of years. And I think there's a couple of things. Investment in recycling infrastructure, both at the MRF to be able to segregate more material, because we know the more a material is segregated before it gets to a reclaimer, the more value it has because it's easier to process. Better recycling away from home and, in multifamily, and just allowing more material to be captured from residents and consumers in the first place. And then I think just understanding the material mix and working on the infrastructure to reclaim that and to make new material out of it is really critical. And then obviously buying recycled materials, buying recycled content products so that we really have this drive. And I think we're going to start to see, especially with PET bottles, a real push because of brand commitments to be able to use that material back into their bottles. But I think it's the other materials, especially colored HDPE or polypropylene and some of the non-bottle rigids, that really are going to have a much harder path forward, because we just don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to process all the material that, if we could really get it back, we could recycle a lot more of it.
Right, you bring up a lot of very good points, and as a matter of fact, I think and hope that some of our speakers later in the program will actually begin to address some of that. I know there's been a lot of domestic investment in plastic recycling in particular in the Carolinas. So we'll be hearing from some other markets that have tried to increase that recycling capacity. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of that. Also knowing that the brand commitments and the other sort of drivers in that buy recycled push that is taking place to help bolster markets will also then help feed that marketplace. So very much appreciate that. One other question that has come in is related to sort of post-industrial recycling, and wonder if you could speak a minute on that. And does STINA track residential versus commercial and industrial plastics recycling? And we as a state, we know there's lots of room for improvement around the commercial recycling and data collection around those issues. So wonder if you could speak to that, and why is it so difficult to get that data?
Yeah, sure. So we focus primarily on post-consumer, which includes from residential sources and from commercial sources. The EPA definition is having met its intended use. So post-industrial, meaning pre-consumer, hasn't ever met its intended use because it never leaves the warehouse, right? And even if it's shipped somewhere else to be recycled, it was never turned into a product or a container or whatever, it's scraps and that sort of thing. And one of the challenges with PIR in particular is for example, a plastic manufacturer maybe takes their scraps just from the end of the line and automatically puts it back into the beginning. And so they don't really necessarily have a way of quantifying how much material they are recycling, because it just gets automatically blended in at the beginning after it leaves the end. So the end of the roll or the scraps that are cut off just gets remelted, re-extruded, repelletized or whatever. And so that, I think, is the big challenge, is how, when you've got this complete circle in a manufacturing facility, how do you quantify that? Obviously, something that is shipped and is processed somewhere else, we can count because you know that it's a truckload and that weighed 40,000 pounds, for example. But so I think that there's a challenge because the data internally, where they're reusing their own scraps, is just really hard to quantify. So I think we could give some idea of PIR, but I just don't think we can get the same level of surety around that total, because it's just too hard to track the bits that are actually never leaving. Whereas as a consumer or a business, you really do know how much you're putting out because you're paying somebody to either dispose of it or you're sending it somewhere and they're giving you a bill of lading at how much that you actually produced.
Yeah.
So
Thank
yeah,
you
I
so
think
much.
I think it's something that can be improved on. I just don't know if we can solve it entirely.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for your presentation, Tanya. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you can stick around and listen to the rest of our agenda today. I'd like to turn it over to one of my staff members, Sandy Skolachenko, who is going to moderate our next session.
Hey, there I am. Thanks, Wendy. So next up, we are going to, can you hear me okay?
We can, we can't see you, but.
Oh, okay. I had my camera on. I thought I was okay. Here I am.
There you are. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So next, we are going to hear about some expansions to plastic recycling capacity in the Carolinas. So we've got 3 panelists lined up representing some of the big players when it comes to plastics recycling in the Carolinas. We're going to hear from Clearpath Recycling, we're going to hear from Shaw Industries, and Unify. So first up, I'd like to introduce Miguel Bergoa. He is the Safety, Health, and Environmental Manager for Clearpath Recycling in Fayetteville. And I'll just let you jump right in, Miguel.
All right. Good morning, Sandy. Good morning, Wendy. Thank you for inviting us. We're excited to be here and bring awareness to recycling. Just before we get started, Clearpath Recycling is a joint venture located in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We recycle PET bottles. We first opened up our business in 2010. DAC Americas, or Alpeg Polyester, being the largest plastic manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere, wanted to team up with Shaw Industries, the world's largest carpet manufacturer, for a more sustainable and green product. So that's what they did and created Clearpath Recycling. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Miguel Bergoa. I started my career in the U.S. Army, worked in the Middle East, building water plants when it was really needed. When I got out the military, I was hired by the Department of Defense to go back to the Middle East and continue working on building water plants. When I finished my career with the Department of Defense, I came back to the United States and was hired by Alpeg Polyester to operate their water plant located here in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I was excited because I felt that it was my way in where I can make a difference in the recycling world. And I knew who Alpeg Polyester was, and I already knew what Clearpath Recycling was working towards. If we can go to the next slide. So what I'll be doing is just walking through basically memory lane. We're really excited about having the ability to team up with the state on some of our projects that really have made a difference, not just to production, but mostly to the environment, where we can prevent some of our material going to the landfill. In the last 2 years, we've done 2 grants with the state, amounting to about $80,000. Those 2 grants have also created jobs and helped continue to sustain the jobs that we currently have here at Clearpath Recycling, which is about 90 employees. If you look at that current slide, that's actually me with the green hat underneath the Clearpath Recycling. I'm joined by our Director of Affairs. If we can go to the next slide. So this was the most recent project that we did. We our situation was where we were sending a lot of mixed plastics that still contained, and let me roll back a little bit. Our purpose at Clearpath Recycling is to collect polyethylene. When you look at a bottle, you turn it upside down, there's a number 1 through 7. Our main goal is to collect 1. And 2 through 7 is what we call our mixed plastics. And this process right here, we were still losing a lot of 1 because we were losing the mixed colored polyethylene, the PET. So what we did here is we teamed up with the state to collect that PET that we were missing, and we started to grind it up. So that created a new product for us that we were able to market, and also we were able to reduce the landfill material that we were sending by 4 million pounds. To us, that was a big achievement. Not only were we able to reduce the landfill by 4 million pounds, the mixed plastics that we were creating, which is 2 through 7, is now more of a pure product, meaning it had value. People were now willing to buy, so we were basically able to eliminate the mixed plastics going to the landfill. So this was a great project that we were able to team up with the state and execute it successfully in the midst of a pandemic. Next slide. So this was another project that we teamed up with the state. In the process of grinding bottles or grinding PET, there is a byproduct called fines. In the past, those fines were eventually making their way into the water system and being released to the landfills. Through some studies, we found that most of those fines were PET, and we attempted to collect it. And after an experiment, we realized that that was a valuable product. We were able to team up with the state to create a grinder's fine loading station where we recover this material, wash it through our process lines, and created a new product that we marketed to our customers. Since then, we've been producing this product at a rate of about 4 million pounds per year. We've cut landfill costs, and we introduced a new product. So these were some of the examples that Tanya was talking about, and the investments that were being done in the recycling businesses. So some of these investments would have not been possible if it wasn't for the state. So we're really grateful that we had the opportunity to team up with the state. Next slide. This is just the motto for both of our companies, Alpeg Polyester. Alpeg Polyester continues to build capacity to deliver integral solutions for our client, boost our community and employees, develop and to make our process even more environmentally friendly in order to achieve this. We've invested over $21 million to a sustainable aimed actions last year. So this is something that we look forward to and continue to create a more environmentally friendly business. And Mark is also going to touch on Shaw and what sustainability means to them. I'd like to thank all the participants. I think we have something in common. We all want to drive to create a more sustainable and an environmentally friendly product, not just for the businesses, but for a better tomorrow. So thank you, and I hope you guys enjoyed our slides.
Thank you, Miguel. I have just two real quick questions for you, and then we'll move into the next presenter. The first one is, well, we've loved working with you and seeing you guys improve your operations and take materials that were once essentially a waste stream to you and create it into that value add marketable material, like you said. I'm curious if you're able to share, you mentioned being able to sort 2 through 7 plastics and market that material with one of your upgrades. Do you have a domestic market for that, or is that something that's sent international?
It's a domestic market. So
great, even better.
Able to make that product more pure. It was easier to less sorting on their end and more valuable because it's now a specific product.
Great. And then one other quick one, with these investments where you can now make that 2 through 7 material that's clean enough to send domestically, and you can sort the colored PET and you have a market for that, has that changed the ability for you to accept incoming bales that are not quite as pure, or are you still kind of have the same sourcing requirements as you always had?
We are we're always looking for bales. There's not enough product out there in the Carolinas, so we're always buying bales. But of course, we always want the best quality. And with that said, though, we're not limiting to a certain amount of or to a certain quality of bale.
Gotcha. Great. Well, I'm going to keep us moving, but stick around, Miguel, because we'll have a few minutes at the end of this portion of the webinar for questions for all the panelists. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Mark Temple. Mark is from Shaw Industries, and he is the Quality Engineering Manager. And I'm just going to keep it simple and let you take it away.
All right. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to talk about Shaw. I've been with the company about 22 years, worked in various manufacturing, engineering, continuous improvement initiatives across the company. Worked here in Columbia for quite a few years now, and as she mentioned, currently the quality manager. So I'd like to begin just giving a high-level overview of Shaw as a company and talk specifically about what we do here at Columbia and with regards to plastic recycling, as Miguel mentioned, with PET bottles. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so we are the world's largest carpet manufacturer in the world, based out of Dalton, Georgia. Been around for quite a number of years, close to or now over 20,000 employees. So pretty much from a product base, anything you can put on the ground or in your home, we make. That's carpet, rugs, engineered flooring, turf, tile, and some other type stuff I'll talk about a little bit later with regards to erosion and landfill covers. Next slide. So again, Shaw, very socially responsible. As Miguel mentioned, around 2009, 2010, Shaw did partner with DAC to start up Clearpath Recycling in Fayetteville. Currently, we've recycled billions of bottles over the years, in addition to millions of pounds of carpet through other avenues. Next slide. So for us, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. Shaw does look at substantial investments, capital over the years as it relates to recycling and other opportunities around sustainability. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, carpet tile, and something big for us recently, if y'all have time to go through the presentation, is closure turf is something we're getting big into to cover landfills and other erosion type initiatives. Next slide. Again, here's some of our brands you may have seen, Home Depot, some of the other smaller flooring companies or flooring vendors throughout. You may have seen some of our products, but again, a very diverse product line. So for us as a whole, if you just look at sustainability specifically, we've recycled a lot of carpet over the last 15 years, over 1 billion pounds. About 90% of our products are cradle to cradle certified, and we have reduced our carbon footprint more than 50% over the last 11 years. Next slide. So the Columbia plant is one of 6 fiber plants in our division. You can see the different locations, primarily based South Carolina, Georgia, and we do have our largest current facility in Andalusia, Alabama. And the majority of these extrusion locations that we call fiber plants do use recycled content in our product mix. So moving ahead to what we do here in Columbia. Very large facility. It's been here since 1961. If you go to the next slide, a little bit more details around the specifics. We've got close to 500 people that work here. We do back up to the Saluda River. We have our own wastewater treatment center on site, and we are a certified wildlife habitat. Next slide. So again, I'll go through these pretty quick, but again, very large location, but a lot of wildlife acreage here, opportunities for future expansions as well. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, back in 2016, we did partner with wildlife and industry together. So we are a WAIT certified site for the state of South Carolina. And a big investment for us, I know we're going to talk some more about plastic, but several years ago, we did install what they can call a combined heat and power system here on site. So we're able to produce roughly 95% of our own power from natural gas. We have a main natural gas pipeline that backs up to the plant. Byproduct of that is steam, which we in turn are able to use to make chilled water using absorption chillers. So reduced our carbon footprint substantially there just with installing this unit here in Columbia a few years ago. So specifically what we do here in Columbia, we do what we call polymerization extrusion. We polymerize nylon chip and extrude it here in our facility. And then we also extrude polyester fiber as well. That just kind of gives you an overview of all the steps it takes to actually make carpet from beginning to end. But again, we're at the beginning of the process until the finished product, which is at some of our other facilities, primarily in Georgia and some other states. For us, primarily, for years, nylon was kind of our bigger fiber, but over the years, polyester has kind of grown substantially. We've made some substantial investments here in Columbia, giving us the ability to run polyester fiber with the intent of running a large recycled content from bottle flakes we do get from CPR. Next slide. So again, just kind of a little background. I know Miguel covered some of this, but we do get a lot of material from CPR, probably on a weekly basis, depending on our products. We could average close to 1 million pounds of post-consumer as well as post-industrial recycled bottle content we put into our polyester carpet fiber. So just kind of a quick overview of what the facility does. BCF stands for bulk continuous filament. We do take what we call rPET or recycled polyester flake, and we feed it in various percentage points, depending on our products, into our extrusion process. And then that is, like I mentioned, sent to other facilities where it is made into carpet. Again, just kind of a breakdown if no one's ever been into an extrusion facility. It's a multi-layer or multi-floor process, incoming material, a lot of mechanical, physical heat that takes to turn plastic into a usable fiber that is then put into carpet. I think that's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. So I had a quick question for you before we keep moving. I noticed in one of your earlier slides, you had a mention that 90% of your products were cradle to cradle certified, which I assume means that you have designed them to be able to be recycled at the end of their useful life. I'm curious if you could talk about specifically in the carpet industry, what kind of design choices are important to make sure that those things can be recycled once they're done with their useful life.
A lot of the recycled material is for commercial grade, so a lot of the things you see placed in schools and offices, the material itself, the backing we use, what we call EcoWorks. It's been around for a long time. Again, like I said, the majority of the products are polyester based in regards to recycling. So from a cradle-cradle perspective, the majority of our products do fall in line with that.
And is that something that Shaw does in-house? You are able to take carpet and process it to be remanufactured, or do you rely on other third-party companies to do that?
We've done some different things throughout the years, different technologies. As they change, we try to adapt to what makes the most sense for us.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I'll ask you to stick around as well so that we can ask some questions to all of the panelists at the end of this session. And without further ado, we will move along to hear from Unify. We have James Cooper on the line, and James is the Sustainability Manager for Unify. So I see you about to pop up here, James, and I'll let you take it from here.
There I am. Good morning. Thank you for having me, and thanks on behalf of Unify and the program as well for allowing us the opportunity to talk. These are really important as far as collaborations and learning ideas, and we're privileged to be here. I'm going to guess my camera is not turning on.
I see your camera box, but I don't see you.
Let me, if you give me one moment, I can fix that. Okay.
There you are.
Hi. Perfect. So at Unify, just as a quick introduction to myself, I'm again, name's James Cooper. I'm a sustainability manager here at Unify. Relatively new. I've been with the organization for about 8 months, and it's in response to really putting down, reaffirming the commitment to sustainability, and where sustainability fits into a broader strategy here at Unify as we really look into our next 50 years we celebrated. Next slide, please. So just a quick introduction. Unify is around 2,800 employees currently. We're headquartered here in Greensboro, North Carolina, with global operations, around $700 million public company revenue. And we pride ourselves on essentially recommitting to manufacturing innovation, driving more equity within the impacts of our products. So that's sustainable brand equity. Next slide, please. Again, we're a global operation. Just hit on the key points here. We have operations within South America and Central America. We are asset light, so we do have the ability to produce reprieve, which is our staple, our primary product as far as recycled polyester out of Asia, and our flagship facility here in Yadkinville, North Carolina, producing our recycled polyester and recycled nylon products, reprieve products. Next slide, please. Okay, so just in general, what we do, we have been a synthetic yarn provider for the last 50 years. Around 20 years ago, we started transitioning to diversify our feedstock, and really jumped into the recycled bottle business, and we like to say that we were the first to really bring recycled polyester, especially in apparel, to the point to where it was the same quality, touch, feel that designers were looking for on that side as virgin. Early on with recycled polyester, there's a fair amount of just slow to adoption because of the touch, the feel. And over the years, we've really worked, as with others, to get that to the point to where the recycled product not only brings a lower impact to the table, but brings the exact same expectations of quality and feel as a virgin product. We do recycled polyester, we do recycled nylon. Our recycled feedstocks include bottles, primarily bottles in our recruit product, but we also do a fair amount of post-industrial waste, as well as post-consumer bottles. And we sell throughout the value chain, since we have sold chip, staple fiber, fiber fill, and then yarn filament as well. We can really adapt and have prided ourselves in the last several years adapting what the market needs out of a lower impact product. Next slide, please. And a quick plug, this is something we've done recently, identifying opportunity. And we've talked a lot about this, how recycling, and I've heard the other speakers, really marketing the aspect of lower impact, good cause, good social impact of products. And I think sometimes that requires story as well, because as we're all aware, sometimes sourcing recycled materials and processing them can cost a bit more than virgin. So this is one of those examples where we have found partnerships to find bottles near coastlines, to avoid them going to the ocean, and actually feel like there's a really good story around selling that type of recycled material and finding a home for it. So quick plug on that. Next slide, please. We are around, this is a little bit outdated slide. We've done 30 billion bottles. We found a lot of success, and again, driving that story on PET bottles of driving marketing around the number of bottles that's in any specific garment, shoe, what have you, that's being used. So we found a lot of customers, and this really speaks to a lot of consumers too. If you're going to buy a shirt or something, to see, a shirt is 4 or 5 PET bottles, and actually the diversion of that waste and how it's being used. We're quite proud of this, realizing that at this point it's we'll continue to accelerate with these bottle goals, but we're proud of where this is at, and I think it really shows a dramatic impact and the opportunity of capacity engagement as we progress. Next slide, please. And this is just, we are quick hit on the fact that we are probably in something you own in your closet, perhaps something you drive. Not all of these brands co-brand with us necessarily, but we do pride ourselves on being a component material right here in the heart of North Carolina that serves some of the biggest brands in apparel, footwear, some automotives as well, and giving them a lower impact option and a reclamation of the waste streams that we can reprocess. Next slide, please. So again, one of the things about this presentation too that I think is important is this is all tied into sustainability for us, and I'm giving a quick update on just a quick slide on what we see as sustainability, and this is nothing new. In fact, we really reached out and did a fair amount of analysis just to baseline ourselves with what sustainability should be, people, planet, product, and the way we look at our business, especially in the next 50 years, and really drives around recycling capacity, not only for us and the ability of how much we're recycling, but also the ability to get more raw material and get more recycled material so that we can give it a second life and look beyond. And that's what really drives our planet and product pillars, as well as our people pillars, because as we're all well informed that plastic recycling and recycling in general is a market that can really drive growth within our state, in the region, and is unrealized in a lot of ways. So it's important to us, and we always bring this back to how our vision of sustainability impacts some of these business decisions as a core business strategy should always be well informed by sustainability as well on these 3 pillars. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a self-serving, but I do feel it's important. It's something that I think everybody within the recycled polyester, especially world, can advocate for. And as you drive those values to your customers, and honestly speak to the fact that sometimes sustainable products cost more in the early run until you get those investment up. We are working with third parties, and we really like the idea of LCAs, in that transparently showing our data, our impact, and how as a component material, our impact, reducing our impact, therefore reduces downstream consumers' impact. All in a larger pursuit of meeting goals like the Paris Agreement and reduction of carbon emissions. We have effectively shown that our REPREVE products have less than generic baseline and virgin PETs. We have a lot longer way to go. We're happy with this. We did celebrate this, and we're key to share this with our stakeholders and partners. But there's more opportunity there, right? Especially within the apparel sector. 90% of a Target, Nike, those folks out there, their impact is indirect impact through their component materials. So Unify, the others on this panel, Shaw as well, who serves, there are opportunities and responsibilities for us as manufacturers to really drive innovation through waste streams and reduce our impact through that and move away as much as we can from virgin material. Next slide, please. So this is a very similar slide, and Tanya, I know you had a presentation that for just post-consumer plastic, and you'll see this a little bit in the same thing. This is for PET bottles from NAPCOR, who is an excellent resource for us, for our organization, as far as driving understanding and predictability with markets. We see the same thing. Quite honestly, as I think the other 2 panelists said, PET bottles are at a premium for the state, and I'd argue for all the East Coast and for the country. We've seen a run to those bottles, and as more organizations drive, especially around PET bottles, drive goals around circularity goals, bottle-to-bottle goals, and just general use of this waste material, not only indicating that it has a lower impact, but the value proposition on the story around it. We believe we'll continue to see this. So the opportunity and need for action as far as increasing capacity, increasing the recycling rate, is now more present than ever. Next slide, please. So kind of the crux of this whole discussion then is, what can we do? And what has Unify thought about internally, and what role can we play to increase recycling capacity, especially within the state, but within the U.S. as well. We can be envious of the capacities in some other countries, especially with some regions of Europe, and thinking and almost wishing for those kind of levels here in the U.S. and the amount of bottles that we could process would be not only mutually beneficial for us, but an opportunity to reduce impact throughout the value stream. So we've taken a 3-tiered approach. We've done a lot of industry engagement. That's part of this, speaking to stakeholders that are far more versed in this, reaching out to other states and understanding what they're doing, such as Oregon, such as some of the bills up in the Northeast as well as some advocacy groups in Tennessee, and trying to introduce bills there, trying to understand what reclamation bills can look like potentially within the state that are pragmatic enough to be successful. So within industry engagement, speaking with folks, learning what our role can be, realizing that we have a role to play, and a mutually beneficial role in showing that not only will it help Unify as a North Carolina U.S. manufacturing company thrive, but it will create jobs. It creates jobs, especially here in the Carolinas. Education. So while this is not only important at an education simply as far as local programs, we have a lot of employees that like to get back to schools teach recycling. I believe, Tanya, you said the phrase wish cycling sometimes. Through social media, through other platforms, we do take an advocacy role on that, realizing while minimal, there is an impact in getting that word out about the impact of recycling. But education also means taking opportunities like this to talk about the impact that an increased capacity would do for an organization like us and our downstream customers, to do some more onshoring with manufacturing here in the U.S. and the real benefits that can have long term, especially around the economic sector. So educational, how it impacts us, what the potential means for us and the lives and the people that we have here at Unify within the state. So just teaching and showing and being transparent with education, I think is really untapped for all of us. And I really appreciate the group to put this session on this morning, because I think that plays a vital role in educating all of us a little bit more in driving these ideas. And then finally, beyond the bottle. So we certainly need to think about diversifying waste streams. And for us, that's looking into textile recycling. And I noted that Shaw, with the cradle to cradle operation, bringing recycling back in and designing for recyclability. Well, apparel is a little bit problematic in that you get mixed yarns or cotton poly feel that in mechanical recycling, which is what we do, there's some leaps in innovation necessary to really take that feedstock as far as throwing your clothes away. But we really envision opportunity here in the next decade or so where clothing is aggregated at a site, separated in some sort of mechanism that can be mechanically recycled, or to the point where some is mechanically recycled. So part of beyond the bottle for our process is talking to our customers, our downstream customers, about designing for recyclability. What does that mean? Well, going to a completely polyester mix, or going to a spun polyester instead of cotton to allow for the ease of recycling, mechanical recycling. And also really just thinking of how to diversify that, because there is a certain amount that we hope and we're looking for, we're advocating for more recycling capacity around PET, especially within the state. But being pragmatic too, diversifying that waste stream, realizing there will be a run on PET in the future, as it is an excellent recyclable material. We have to be pragmatic about where we're going to be in the business and the opportunity for recycling clothing and textile waste in the future and the impact that will have. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and eager to, if you all have any questions through the panel, and appreciate the other panels as well. Thanks again.
Thank you, James. I have a quick two-parter follow-up question for you, and then I'll bring the other two panelists back on, and we can ask all three of you some questions from the audience. I was really interested to see sort of your global warming scores that you guys were starting to incorporate and measure in comparison to using virgin or other rPET operations. I'm curious, here's where the two-parter comes in. Are your brands who are buying Reprieve fiber interested in that score? Is this something that you are being asked to report to them? And then the second part is, do those numbers sort of include the increasing transportation as sources of PET become further and further away for you?
Yeah, that's a great point. To answer your first question, yes. And we, not only are they requesting it, I'd almost argue they're very close to demanding it. And the reason being that if you take a look at any, not only in clothing and apparel, and I'm going to pick on them a little bit, but a lot of these brands have broader carbon emissions or net zero goals. And most organizations, especially on the apparel side, where they do have a long value chain, it's all indirect impact. So the only really ability, the silver bullet for them to reduce their impact is by going to the fiber producers. So for us, it's recycled polyester. For cotton, it'd be sustainable organic or globally organic textile or cotton standard. So yes, and we see a lot of opportunity, and we see a vision of sustainability around transparent data collection with LCAs, especially in manufacturing. And we think that we're going to try to meet them where they're at and be proactive around that. I apologize. What was your second part of that question?
So the second part is when you're, coming up with those scores, sort of how does the increasing transportation distances to source your material play into that? Yeah.
Yeah, it has. So within our LCAs, we can actually just identify hotspots and how much each sector of emissions, whether it's a scope 3, which is that logistics component, because we don't own all, the trucks are not our trucks they're bringing in. It's something that as it grows, we will have to identify opportunities to reduce either within our 4 walls or something else to offset that. So to answer your question, it's part of our modeling. And the more we have to go across, to your point, to California or something, not only is that cost heavy, but to your point, it's emissions heavy too. And electric semi trucks, while we're very excited about the work Volvo is doing, and especially locally, and we know that's coming, it's not a solution yet. So yeah, it has an impact. Like with everybody here, we're hopeful that there's more push, potentially legislative push here on the East Coast that can drive those percentages up so that we're not driving across state. Because like so much of us here, not only does that increase our costs, but it increases our impact. And good sustainable business ties cost and impact together really well. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for that. And I want to invite Miguel and Mark to join us back maybe on camera here if you want to. I have some questions to pose to all 3 of you and a couple follow-ups for Miguel and Mark. Cool, thank you. So here's a question for all 3 of you, and this is another multi-parter. So curious if you can speak to how much of your total feedstock is sourced from the Carolinas, if you have that information. And what do you see are the barriers to increase that percentage? And maybe we can go in reverse. I can start with James and then we'll work our way backwards.
We do have that information. I don't have it up in front of me. Every bale that we get, we know exactly where it comes from, like I expect most of us do. As far as opportunities to, I think I kind of hit that on that side. We see education and just working together, I think, is really the way forward in driving what the impacts are across all our businesses. Yeah, we know it. It just and we see a drive, especially a run here in the Carolinas, more so recently on PET bottles.
Great, thanks. And how about you, Mark?
From a Columbia's perspective, the vast majority of our materials come from the Carolinas, both virgin and recycled materials.
And any specific opportunities that you see, to gather even more material here from Carolinas and keep it local?
It's like the other panels have mentioned, it's just highly competitive. Bottles we can't get enough. So trying to get them from Canada, the West Coast, wherever we can. We'd like to get as many from the Carolinas, but obviously we need them from everywhere we can.
And Miguel, how about Clearpath?
So, like the other panelists mentioned, for logistics purposes, we try to recover as much as we can from the Carolinas. But unfortunately, right now, the supply and demand is not at the same level. The demand is much higher. Furthermore, for Clearpath Recycling, given the fact that we try to be a sustainable company, or an environmentally sustainable company, 99% of our product is curbside. It's what people are putting in the trash bins is what we're trying to recover. And we purposely keep that number high. We have less than 1%, which is considered post-industrial. To answer your question, how can we increase the local sourcing? That's a tough question. And I don't know that we have enough time right now to be able to address that issue.
Well, let me ask you a question that you may want to answer, you may want to plead the fifth on this, but sort of related. Would any of you support bottle bills as a means of getting more PET bottles, specifically here in the Carolinas? And we
Yes.
can keep the same order. We'll go James, Mark, and Miguel.
Okay.
So being relatively new, I've been in apparel for a while. I've leaned away from the term bottle bills and looked into some of the reclamation, as I think might be a more pragmatic way of approaching. The answer is yes. I mean, I think there is a legislative pathway, a pragmatic best practice here in the future that can benefit all parties. And Unify Unify is willing, and we have actively engaged in trying to be part of that conversation and be a stakeholder in that. I don't know what it would look like necessarily, but that's something that, it's, beyond just being self-serving for our business and the recycling business in general in North Carolina, has a lot of opportunity to create growth in jobs, reduce waste, conservancy. There's a amount of benefits, and we continue to lean on our leaders to come up with a pragmatic solution on that.
Thanks for that. Mark or Miguel, you want to comment on that one?
I think both of our companies will support anything that would increase the recycling efforts in the Carolinas. Meaning as a post-deposit, I think it's something that we would welcome. We've already seen that the states where they are driving a post-deposit program, we get better quality material from them. So I think it'd be good if the Carolinas adapted such a regulation.
Yeah. Miguel makes a really good point that the quality gets better too, not only the quantity, which would certainly help in our processing.
Correct.
Yeah, definitely. And here's a question probably for James and Miguel, since you guys are dealing with bales of PET. I'm sure you get some PET clamshells that come in with the bottle bales. How do you deal with those? And do either of you have a way to use them? Like, would you ever intentionally source like a clamshell bale of material? We can start with Miguel.
We've been down this road before, and actually we have purchased materials that are not bottles, but are still the plastic that we're looking for. We find a way to feed it into the process where it's not going to be lost. The clamshells sometimes are lost in the ballistic separators, or depending if it's a dual color clamshell, then it gets lost there, or if it's two different styles of plastics, our optical sorters may read it as one or the other. So depending on what type of plastic it is, it's where we introduce it into the process so we can get the highest yield from that product.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe
I just know if it just depends on where we input it into our process step. But if it's PET, we can use it, and we use a fair amount of post-industrial waste that our team sources from local partners, giving them an opportunity to be zero waste to landfill as well. And we pride ourselves on kind of being that party to extend the life of potential waste streams that they're looking for some value out of.
And what kind of post-industrial materials are you guys able to accept? Is that PET as well?
Yeah. If it's PET, we can find a way to, depending on, there are some caveats to that, how dirty it is or something, but clamshells, as you mentioned, pre-blown bottles, stuff like that, yeah, we can take PET waste. A lot of it's internal though. I will say a lot of it, we are able to really recycle a lot of internal waste from our spinning operations or extruder and kind of reprocess it, remix it in to become a homogeneous solution again. So we're very lucky that our process allows for that too.
That's great. I have a question. This is probably most appropriate for Mark and James to answer, since you guys are creating finished products or closer to finished products. So in your opinion, what can consumers do to help advocate for more recycled content in their flooring solutions or in their clothing? And Mark, maybe I'll let you tackle that one first. What do you think really makes a difference from the consumer perspective?
Kind of a tough question, because obviously people don't always want to pay for recycled content. So just people understanding the value and thinking about the future, what it holds for us all. Again, we do a lot with our branding, just trying to promote it. But again, bottom line comes down to financials. So are people willing to pay for it?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, our marketing team, I think, does a great job in trying to connect that story and trying to identify best practices around it, because to Mark's point, it doesn't matter. You can make the most sustainable product, but there does have to be a story associated with it to create that value so the consumer buys it. We are lucky that we rely on a lot of post downstream customers to do that. That really drives their story, their narrative around that, and we can be a component. But going back to that idea around transparency around LCA, bringing that kind of data in has assisted us in showing that this is what you're paying for. You're paying for a legitimate step up or a step down in impact, and here's the receipts. So that's been our strategy with that.
Yeah, that's great. So as with many things in this world, money talks. If people buy it, that's the signal you need to keep making it and make those investments. So I have kind of an easy one. This is just sort of a curiosity for me. What would you say is like the biggest contaminant, or the biggest problem that comes in PET bales that you have to deal with? Let's start with James on this one.
Organics, probably. I mean, dirt, just organics, and there are some, of course, the caps and everything have value, and I know Miguel, you had mentioned that earlier as far as finding actually significant value in being able to top those off. Because bales aren't 100% PET, it is problematic with some of the waste that we don't know how to find, or some of the sorted waste within the filtration process and cleaning process. But I'd say the biggest waste is probably just organics within the bales.
And Miguel, how about for Clearpath?
I would say one of the biggest issues that we have that we're dealing with would be barrier layer plastics, which is multi-layer type plastics, and also sleeves on bottles, because they cover what the actual product is. The sleeve could be PVC, but the actual product, the bottle itself, is polyethylene. So our equipment reads it as PVC and will reject it. To remove those heat shrink sleeves, it's a very difficult process because it's not being held by glue. If it was being held by glue, we could heat it up to above 82 Celsius and the glue would let go. The heat shrink sleeves hold on to that bottle, and it just becomes a very difficult process to separate those two.
That's interesting. Thank you for that. And, I think we'll tie in a little bit later when we talk a little bit more this morning about design for recyclability, those types of things, and understanding what problems they create for the processors and ways to go about getting the label that you need in a way that's not going to inhibit the recycler. So I think we're almost at about 10:25, and I believe we have a couple minutes for a quick break before we continue. So I want to say a huge thank you to our three panelists. We appreciate you being here today, and we appreciate everything you're doing for recycling in the Carolinas. And so thanks for the time today. And I'm going to turn it over to Wendy, and I think she'll instruct us on when to log back in.
Yes, thank you. We're just going to take a quick, little less than 5-minute break, give y'all, everyone a chance for a little quick bio break. We certainly want you to be sure to be back at your computer by 10:30. We're going to have a really important set of presentations coming sharp at 10:30. So please, please join us back. In the meantime, we're also going to kind of keep your attention. I think Matt's loading up a couple of videos that we would like to share, and we'll talk more about the context around these videos at the end of our program today. So quick break, return at 10:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everybody enjoyed watching the mascot challenge. We'll have some more information on that later in the presentation. My name is Mike Green. I am one of Wendy's staff members as part of the Recycling Business Assistance Center. Very excited about our session this morning as we are going to discuss emerging technologies. Our first presenter this morning is Holly Alexander from Eastman. She is the Strategic and Initiatives Manager, and they've got some really cool things going on. So I will invite Holly to join us on the screen.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me as well?
Yep, I can hear you. Sounds great.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Hey, thank you so much for your time today. Really excited to spend a little bit of time and talk with you about recycling, particularly in the Southeast and in the Carolinas. Again, Holly Alexander. I work in our corporate sustainability organization at Eastman, and want to talk to you today a little bit about some what we hope are transformative solutions to help to support plastics recycling. So a couple of things in this discussion. If you're not familiar with Eastman, we are headquartered in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I'll show you on a map in just a second where that is. But we are a materials innovation company, which is another fancy way of saying we're a chemical company. But we make a variety of different products and materials, from plastics to fibers to a lot of other types of chemicals and things that go into the products that you use every day. But we are a Fortune 250 company, I believe, but about $8.5 billion in revenue. And again, like I said, located in Kingsport, Tennessee, so just over the mountain. So if you're not familiar with where Kingsport is, this is where you guys can find us. And I was really excited to hear some of the other presenters talking about sort of the size and the scale of some of their facilities. So our facility, we're over 100 years old in Kingsport, and we have 550 buildings on our location. We have a total of 4,000 acres, but over 900 acres of active manufacturing. And in the true course of Americans who use things like football fields to measure, that's about 700 football fields of active manufacturing, basically real estate that we have in the Kingsport area. So we're not real far from the Carolinas, so we consider you all to be neighbors and really a key location when we're thinking about recycling. Now, as you all know, there's a significant effort that needs to go on right now because we have multiple crises as a country, as a world that we're dealing with, and that has to do with the plastic waste crisis. We also have significant issues around climate change that we need to make sure that we're not going the wrong direction in that. And then also we have growing populations. We're on track to have over 10 billion people on the planet. And we have to be able to figure out how to manage the resources to be able to support those without creating additional challenges on the climate side or in the plastic waste side. So from Eastman's standpoint, we have made some commitments for 2030, and we're really trying to invest in and innovate in a sustainable future. And we have three main areas that we're focused on with these goals. One is on climate change. And we are planning, we've set goals to reduce our absolute emissions by 1/3 by 2030, with the goal of being net neutral carbon by 2050. We also have goals around circularity, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. And we've also set some goals around caring for society, which help around inclusion and diversity and trying to make sure that we're getting to a good, equitable environment for lots of different people, lots of different backgrounds and races and genders. So those are some of the things that we're working on there, but happy to spend time. But what I'd really like to do is talk a little bit more about circularity today, since we're talking about plastics recycling. So for Eastman, one of the big areas that we're focusing on right now is circular economy. You guys are very familiar with linear economy, and I think when you think about recyclers, these are some of the folks who are helping to enable circularity today, and we want to continue to do that. But as a society, we're really good at extracting raw materials, making products, using them once, and then throwing them away. Now, sometimes they go into recycling, sometimes they don't. We really need to rethink this and start really imagining, how do we start to create true circularity and start continually keep using those same molecules over and over and over again without the need to continually extract new fossil fuels to be able to make those materials. And this is a big area that Eastman's focusing on. Now, you guys are familiar, you've seen the opportunity. We have a big opportunity, and we're doing a ton of great work around recycling with plastics, but there's so much opportunity. But if you look globally at the global polymers flow, about 40% of material that's generated on an annual basis, plastics that are generated annually, go into landfills. We have another 25% that go into incineration, and 16% that get collected for recycling globally. These are global numbers, but only 12% of that actually gets recycled. So how do we start to expand the pie so that we can get more of those materials that are getting incinerated or going to landfill, or even trying to create end markets so materials may not be leaked into the environment, to start to recycle those also? So we can't lose sight of the plastic waste issue. And so Eastman's really focused on making sure that we are reducing, reusing, and recycling, but we recognize that plastics offer key benefits around climate and around product protection that are essential. And so we need to not lose that in the meantime. And I loved the presentation earlier, looking at the different formats of packaging. And so there are choices that go into those, but how do we make sure that we still have the most environmentally beneficial and the most impactful packaging, and let's say the right level of protection for packaging to not go in the wrong direction? All right, this is going to be information that you guys probably know a lot better than me, but one of the challenges we bumped into is that from Eastman's perspective in particular is we don't think that mechanical recycling is going to be enough to solve the plastic waste problem. And we have some limitations, and we're really going to be focused mostly on the largest volume and the most commonly used formats of packaging and material that's out there. And so in that case, we have great markets for PET, a lot of demand there. We have great markets for high density polyethylene. We have emerging markets for polypropylene, but pretty much anything else out there has very, very little opportunity within the mechanical recycling stream as it exists today for what I would consider to be municipal. There are fantastic post-industrial markets in a lot of these spaces, but that's a very different ballgame than what we're trying to crack around post-consumer. So when we also start thinking about the amount of goals that are out there with the number of companies, the volume of material that we're generating today is not sufficient to be able to meet the demands of the future. So it's great. It means we're all going in the right direction, but we've got to do things dramatically different. So when you start looking at 25% recycled content goals in plastic packaging or products by 2025, we need to do something different. And it's really going to take the inclusion of additional technologies, and that's what we want to talk about today. So Eastman is using some technologies called molecular recycling. You guys are familiar, mechanical recycling, how that works. With molecular, what we're going to do is we're going to take mixed plastic waste streams, break them back down to the molecular level, and then use them to make new products. And that's going to give us a chance to start to overcome some of the heat history degradation that happens with mechanical recycling or any plastics as they're used over time. So one of my colleagues created this slide that I think is great. Not everybody understands exactly how plastics are created in the first place, but if you think about plastics today, they are made from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And we get those typically from fossil fuel sources, whether it's coal, oil, natural gas, but we also get oxygen from the air. And with those, we create combinations of different molecules that could look like PET or high density polyethylene, polypropylene, PVC, polystyrene. These are all made from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They're just different formulations of those molecules together. But from that, we make lots of different products that we all use today. Now, the way that chemical recycling works is we're just gonna switch out on the beginning of this. So we're going to start by using materials that have already been used. So whether it's carpet, whether it's textiles, whether it's PET products that say are lower value to a reclaimer, but we take these products and we use them and basically break these down to get back to those carbons, the hydrogens, and oxygens. And from that, we make the exact same materials that folks are used to using today. And that's really where we're working on this right now. Now, Eastman is working in a couple of different places around molecular recycling. One is our carbon renewal technology, and this is an asset that is commercial, and it's operational in Kingsport. And we can take a broader mix of materials that go into this and then be able to create new products. So this was a place where we took an existing asset, retrofit it to be able to start to co-feed mixed plastics into that to start to displace some of the virgin fossil fuels that were going into that technology. We also have our polyester renewal technologies, and we have two different technologies that we're going to leverage in this space. One is glycolysis, which is operational today. And this has been a really important step for Eastman to start to learn what do the end markets look like in here. The other area that we're going into is methanolysis, and this is going to be more of our flagship technology here, because this is going to give us the opportunity to work with a broad mix of PET-based products. So whether it is all of those carpets, textiles, etc. But from these, we're going to produce different products. Okay. Now, we also, with our methanolysis plant, our plan is for that to be mechanically complete by the end of 2022 with startup in 2023. So we're getting closer and closer to that. All right, so carbon renewal technology. This is technology that we can use a broader mix of materials. We produce syngas with that, so CO and hydrogen, and from that, we make a broad mix of cellulosic-based plastics and textiles and fibers and acetyl chemicals that go into a lot of different things. If anybody's wearing, say, cellulose acetate or plastic frames, glasses frames, those are likely made out of a cellulose acetate, which is a great example of a material that could come from this technology. And we also, with this technology, the syngas that we're producing ranges from 20 to 50% lower in greenhouse gas emissions compared to virgin manufacturing. And we think that's a really important consideration because we don't want to lose sight of the climate crisis while we're trying to fix the plastic waste crisis. We have to solve both simultaneously. Then the other area that we mentioned is the polyester renewal. And from this, we're going to break polyester down, but we're not going to go quite as far. We're going to go back into the monomers that create polyester. So in this case, it'll be DMT and ethylene glycol. And from that, we can make new PET-based products. So whether it's specialty copolyesters that go into articles like a reusable cup or turbis tumbler, Camelback bottle, or into a more traditional PET, but of a variety of places there. And we have demonstrated lower greenhouse gas emissions with those technologies as well. So with this, we've really focused on trying to get these materials into the marketplace because we want to figure out, is there value, is there demand? Because these aren't new technologies. And what we're practicing here is technology that we first started operating when we were part of Kodak in the 1990s. But what's been exciting is this really dramatic shift and focus on a circular economy that's making it so these technologies have really clear demand and really clear opportunity. So how are we doing time-wise? Doing good so far. Okay, so we have a goal with our recycling technologies of recycling 250 million pounds of waste plastics annually by 2025 and 500 million pounds by 2030. So we're getting started in this. Now, very rarely when you talk about the amount of time it takes to build large scale assets and all of that, do you sit there and say, gosh, I sure am glad this is going to take years. In this case, we did, because this is giving us a chance to start to figure out how do we source the material to go into this. Because very importantly, we want to make sure that what we're doing is complementary to mechanical recycling. If you have products that are great candidates for mechanical recycling, then that's where they should go. You have a much lower impact on the planet and on the environment when you can process materials via mechanical recycling. But not all articles and materials and formats are well suited for mechanical recycling today. And that's where we want to come in. Now, I'm based in Tennessee, as I mentioned, and this is not a Carolina thing. And so at the risk of potentially creating some scuffles out there, probably not as much this year as other years, and please avoid the jokes about trash on the field. This is Neyland Stadium, where the University of Tennessee plays football. And if we took 250 million pounds of plastics, ground it up, it would fill that yellow box inside that stadium. And so what we're really working on right now is how do we start to source this and how do we do it? So the main way we're working on this today is kind of threefold. We are buying streams of material that are being collected, sorted, and aggregated today that would have maybe a higher value being processed via mechanical recycling. So in some cases, this might be like lumps and chunks that come out of, it might be purge waste, it might be strapping, it could be fines, it could be a variety of different things that are out there that maybe don't have a great home. We're also working on partnering to start to create strategic partnerships, and we're going to talk a little bit more about carpet in just a second. But in the other case, we're also working to create new streams where material isn't collected. And our own local community in the northeastern part of Tennessee is one of those. And we'll talk just a bit more about that as well. So with carpet, one of the things that we've been doing is we're working with an organization called Circular Polymers. And they are working with this, basically where carpet is being collected and extended producer responsibility, or EPR fees, are being leveraged on that carpet into the system. So in the state of California, they have carpet that needs to be collected. They're trying to keep it out of landfill. And so Eastman is working with Circular Polymers today, contracting with them for material that we will want to use in our methanolysis facility once it starts up. However, in the meantime, we are processing that carpet fiber via our carbon renewal technology, because this gives them a great chance to start to build that business, to build the business model, and to build demand for them as well. So we're working very closely with that. And this has been a great collaboration where we're helping to start to pull post-consumer material, and in this case, PET-based carpet fiber, and find a great home for that and be able to turn it back into new polyester-based products. But there's more that we need to do. And as we think about trying to renew the recycling system, the big challenge that I would love folks to start to think about is we need to think about policy. We've got to think about advanced technologies, and then also the capabilities of our system to be able to generate streams. So one of the big areas that I think it's very important for us to start to think is, how do we start to move from restricting material out of the system to get to the point that we can start to collect more material, but we have to sort better, okay? We have to figure out how to get the right materials to the right places. How do we create bale specs so there are clear guidelines on what needs to go to a Clearpath for recycling versus maybe what would go to an Eastman, based on the differences of the technologies that we're operating, but to make sure we can all get the materials that are useful for us. And with that, we've got to start to recycle more. Now, it's going to be hard to get there. And so one of the things that we need to keep in mind is, how do we expand that infrastructure? How do we leverage incentives to do this? And how do we start to make sure that material to material recycling technologies are included when we talk about recycling numbers and recyclability? But there's a lot of work that we need to do. Now, locally within our area, and I mentioned too, Kingsport, Tennessee, we were actually one of those victims, I would say, of National Sword, where you follow the money and eventually the economics didn't make sense. And so we had some pretty significant challenges there. And as the infrastructure collapsed, we eventually lost the outlets for material, and almost none of the communities within about the 9-county area where we operate have access to curbside recycling now. There are a couple that do. There's still some drop-offs and all that, but it has completely collapsed predominantly, and it's gotten to be more. And what we're trying to help folks recognize is that we need to start to build this infrastructure locally, because the likelihood of us ever exporting at the same levels that we did historically, kind of pre-National Sword, is highly unlikely. Now, the other part too, I just want to make sure everybody is aware, is we also have an interesting opportunity in the Tri-Cities area in Tennessee with a company called Domtar. You guys may be familiar with them. They're more on the paper side, and they had a paper mill. They also have a 100-year history in Kingsport. They had a paper mill here that they shuttered a few years ago as copy paper and that kind of stuff really continued, the demand continues to fall. But they are retrofitting that mill to be able to make 100% recycled liner board. And this is a great opportunity for us to really revitalize and create a circular economy within our community here. So when you're looking at having one of the largest fiber recycling organizations, at the same time, you also have an organization like Eastman building one of the largest molecular recycling plants out there. We have cool opportunity to really create circularity here locally and really start to transition how we make products. But really excited to get your questions today and to hopefully start to really kickstart some conversation and figure out how we can work together, because it's really going to take all of us working together to create this circular economy. So we'll come back to questions in a minute. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome, Holly. Thank you so much. I had a few quick questions
Yes, sir.
before we move on. First of all, I almost broke into Rocky Top in the middle of the presentation there with the stadium. It would have been really bad. I've got a horrible cold. But anyway, I was very excited to hear about the focus of mechanical recycling working hand in hand, or with chemical recycling working hand in hand with mechanical recycling. Do you envision partnerships between companies that focus on one working with companies that focus on the other to kind of trade materials?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really where we want to spend some time today, is find out who's interested in starting to engage in those conversations. What are the opportunities? Where do they have materials that are byproducts out of their processes made from recycled content that they can't do anything with? And then how can we help to kind of address those needs too? And I think there's going to be good opportunities for us to all work together. Bottom line is, we need more material. I think everybody needs more material, and we want to work collaboratively, and we want to build new streams so that we can avoid some of the competition. We don't want there to be any competition for the material as we go, just because, not illegally, and of course, but we just want to make sure that we're getting the right streams to the right people. But there's really interesting synergies when you think about what Shaw is doing, what Unify is doing, what Eastman is doing, and then you start getting into packaging. There's really interesting synergies there between PET that flows between textile, apparel, packaging, and I think chemical recycling is going to be one of those key mechanisms to help us keep this whole thing connected together.
Fantastic. So I've had two other questions that came in on
Great.
materials. So is this a process that could deal with a mixed bale, or would you be looking more for separated material?
It's a great question. I think it's going to depend, of course. Polyester or PET is going to be the material that we are most focused on trying to acquire, but we want to make sure we have capabilities to deal with a broader mix. But the nice thing is we could deal with a variety of different types of PET and PET formats. So colored, opaque, thermoforms, those are things that would be fantastic materials for us going forward with that. But happy to have question or to answer questions and engage with folks if they want to talk more about streams that they have that they're looking for opportunities for.
Cool. And then what about multi-layered items, or A, multi-layered items, but B, dealing with contaminants in the load? Like what if there's metal bits or non-polymer materials that are put in with the material?
Yeah, as far as the contaminants, it's generally with our carbon renewal technology, anything that's inorganic would be a contaminant in there. Anything else that we can break down into the carbons, the hydrogens, and oxygens, those are going to be very, very useful materials and not really contaminants. We do have a concern about PVC in that space just due to corrosion concerns in that technology. So we want to avoid PVC there. We also would like to avoid PVC in our methanolysis facility, but we can handle some of that if we need to. But we're really working on trying to build technologies that can be fairly robust, because if we have to start with the cleanest bales that are out there, then at that point in time, those are probably much better candidates for mechanical recycling. So we have to build the capability to deal with those different things. So a little bit of metal and some of those things, we're building robustness into the processes to deal with those.
Fantastic. Well, Holly, thank you so much. Great presentation. Stick around for a little bit. We'll bring you back at the very end and do a big panel discussion. Hopefully we'll get a lot of cool questions there. Coming up next, we have Tamsen Edefa. She is the Chief Sustainability Officer for PureCycle, and I'm very excited to have you on today with us.
Thank you so much. Let me fire up my screen and hopefully get us going. Sorry for that. So thank you everyone for having me come on this and be part of kind of a advanced recycling platform. And I really wanted to talk about bringing circularity, and I saw how Holly brought that into her presentation. I think it's very important for us to be able to grow recycling both economically and keep the demand along with the collection and the supply. So that's really important. So I'm Tamsen Edefa, Chief Sustainability Officer. Many of you guys might know me through being part of Envision's startup and founder of Envision back in 2001. I left Envision a little over a year ago, but I now have 33 years of plastics recycling experience. And I joined PureCycle in February because many of you who do know me know that I was very passionate about getting polypropylene recycling off of the ground. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that needs to happen later, but I'm really excited to have the opportunity to get polypropylene recycling more off the ground by joining PureCycle. And so I really wanted to talk about what brings us here today and why it's so important for us to have sustainability. And this is Tamsen Edefa's opinion. I kind of look back of, you know, starting in this industry in 1988, but I look at where did it really kind of stick and have an evolution of growth that hasn't really been a big decline in recycling as far as our need to do it. And so I look back at history and I look at the Vision 2050 report that was written in 2010 as kind of the pinnacle moment that told society we've got to do recycling, especially the consumer product companies. And so I highly encourage anybody, because it's, to me, it's the reason we're here. Sure, a lot of us saw the Science Magazine report that also happened in 2010 by Jenna Jambak that talked about the plastics in the ocean, and that's a horrific issue that we have and we need to address and deal with. But if you look at the Vision 2050 report, it basically said out of its assessment that if we continue to consume what we produce today with population growth and anticipated increased demand on materials, that we're going to consume 2.3 times what the Earth can produce by 2030. We're at 2021 now and almost 2022. We're running out of time. So to me, that was a pinnacle statement. I think it's why we're seeing more activity today. And in fact, in that report, it talked about 2020 to 2030 would kind of be the teenage years that we have to get recycling off the ground to kind of equalize our consumption to be 1-to-1, Earth providing what we need and us consuming the equality of what the Earth can provide. And recycling is a huge key to that, but it's going to be expensive until we get the collection up to equal the demand that we have to balance out that 2.3 down to 1. So that's, again, a really important thing. Then we had a small taste of what it would be like if China stopped using our material with the Chinese fence in 2013. So then the Ellen MacArthur Foundation started getting the circular economy going in 2016. And then the new premier of China came out and said, okay, I've still let all this material get by me. We are going to enforce the laws that we have written about not accepting other countries' waste. And so they gave us a year warning. And in 2018, it happened, the national sword. With that, we had the Ocean Conference in Bali under the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and the new plastics economy erupted. And then multiple pacts formed across the world. And finally, this past year, the US Plastics Pact with its many goals and commitments by the consumer product companies that are members of that. I like to point out that there's well over 500 commitments out there globally from consumer product companies with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and 80% of those companies are based in the United States. So I find that very interesting. I thought I would bring it up. When we look at history, you know, in the 80s, we came out with reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 R's. We're only recycling about 8.9% in the United States of all the recyclables. I heard Holly's presentation and I thought, oh, she said 12 point something percent. So maybe that it was a global. So maybe we're not doing as well in the US as the global consumption of recyclables, or my dad is old. But either way, it's a far cry from where we need to be. And so this again is a Tamsenism. These are the 10 R's that I've said in my mind that we need to have implemented in order to really solve the solution of circularity. And so it starts with being responsible. Those that make the materials being part of the solution for getting it recovered. And so with responsibility comes a lot of different players in between. And we've got consumer product companies right now who are actively redesigning their packaging to kind of meet the commitment of the US Plastics Pact so that everything is recyclable. And we also have to make sure everything is recoverable, and not everything can be recovered in the MRF. And Holly brought up, or I actually think it was earlier than Holly when it was brought up with Stina, that film getting recycled at drop-off centers and grocery stores and things like that really helps not put contamination in the MRF. We need to have more of those to be able to recover more. Stina talked about capacities and not enough capacities for recycling to meet the goals. And so again, I think that MRFs need to grow and expand, but other collection services need to evolve. And I'm starting to see a lot of subscription services. There's Recyclops, there's Ridwell, there's Replenish. These are examples of some companies that have gone out to the consumers and said, hey, if you want to recycle beyond HDP and PET bottles and you want to recycle other types of plastics, you can sign up for a subscription service with us. Some charge a fee, some do not, but it's an evolution that's happening, and it's well welcomed, especially with what I've got on my plate coming forward that I'll talk about. But again, I've got these 10 R's, and you know, the last one with reward isn't really, not the last one, the second to the last one, reward isn't really about paying the consumer, even though I think like bottle bills where there is a monetary reward to recycle really helps incentivize consumers to participate. But when I look at today and being a consumer myself, I think about how difficult it is to recycle because it's so confusing. So the more opportunities we can expand recycling, the least we have to explain what you can't recycle, right? And so when we get to a place where we can say all packaging is recyclable, think of the reward of how easy it makes it to the consumer to not have to think about or look at the bottom of the container. So that's kind of my interpretation of reward and what's needed. And then when I look at all these 9 R's, and if we can't solve the problem and we can't get everybody to participate, then you know, regulations are going to have to come in play, and they've already come in play in a very strong way in Europe with bans on certain plastics and mandates on certain recycled content in certain formats of packaging. Sorry, I'm bad at pushing buttons apparently. So now I'm going to talk about polypropylene and why I wanted it recycled so badly, why I was at Envision and wanted to kind of incorporate and add that to the recycling processes that we had there. It is the #1 resin used in the world, the #1 polymer at 160 billion plus pounds a year with a projected growth rate of over 4%. And so you can kind of look, you know, US by itself is got a 20 billion pound per year demand. That's a lot of plastic. And unfortunately, it is recycled at less than 1%, at 0.8%. So the largest volume of resin produced is recycled at a very, very small percentage rate. And that has bothered me for a long time. Now, why? It's so versatile. That's why it's consumed. It can go into so many different formats of packaging and textiles and rigid containers and flexible, you know, from potato chip bags to bottles to toys and astroturf and carpet and parts of tennis courts with the nets and just automotive, so many different formats. And when you look at it and you compare it to what's recycled today, predominantly mechanically at curbside, you've got clear PET, which is predominantly what everybody wants in bottle format only. And then you've got natural HDP, which has gone through the roof this past couple of years in pricing because it's natural. It's a single type of material with the same melt flow, the same polymer, It's easy to educate the consumers, recycle all your milk bottles, recycle all your beverage containers. But when you think about polypropylene, what's the critical mass that we tell the consumer they can put in the bin and get recycled to entice mechanical recyclers to recycle it? So that's one issue. Then the second issue is you see all these different formats and all these different colors, and how can a mechanical recycler make a consistent end material without critical mass? You've got KW Plastic, who's a big polypropylene recycler, but what are they predominantly recycling today? Car battery cases. So, you know, there's over 200 million pounds of car battery cases made out of the same polypropylene, same melt flow, same specs. And so that made enough critical mass for them to go out and recycle it. But it's black, it's limited in its end uses to go into packaging formats. And as mentioned, we have all these different packs out there, and besides having ambition to make all their packaging recyclable, they have great ambition, like Holly showed on her slide, of different companies like L'Oreal and P&G making commitments to have recycled content. And so that kind of brings to why PureCycle came about to begin with. So as mentioned, PET checkmark, we've got the bottles, and hopefully we'll get the other formats of PET recycled thanks to Holly's technology. We've got the HDP bottles, again, checked off. It gets recycled at a pretty good rate. Both could be recycled more. 30% is nothing to sneeze at, but it could be better. And then you've got polypropylene, as mentioned, less than 1%. And so now you've got PureCycle, who's come in, and I listened to Holly's presentation of 250 million pounds by 2025. I'll tell you about my ambition by 2025 here coming. So PureCycle is a technology that's unique and different than chemical recycling, different than mechanical recycling, that brings absolutely clear FDA high quality polypropylene from different formats back into the marketplace for different consumer product companies to use. It is a solvent recycling through what we call purification. It does not change the molecular structure of polypropylene, so it's not considered chemical recycling. So it's a new technology. No one's ever commercialized it until us. We haven't officially come out with our commercial quantity, but we did put in a pilot plant that allowed us to sample customers, and so far over 90% of the customers that have trialed our material have signed up for commitments to buy from us once we are commercial. So it's pretty exciting. And it does bring a lower carbon footprint than virgin materials. And so it also brings something that the consumer product companies that buy the resin are looking for, which is to lower their LCA. So that kind of puts us at between chemical recycling and virgin recycling and mechanical recycling. We kind of fall in the middle of that space. So it is more energy consumption than mechanical. Mechanical is the best. It just doesn't make the quality for all the formats of packaging that are needed out there today with their current processes. So I'm going to show you guys some examples and kind of show you the timeline to PureCycle. But first, I want to point out some of the awards we've gotten because of this technology. The one I kind of get excited about is the Solar Impulse Award, which has to do with you've got a technology that actually improves the environment, but is for profit. Because in reality, if you're not for profit, you might not be sustainable. And so it's an exciting time for PureCycle to come about. This is our timeline. We started with Procter & Gamble in 2012, going out and trying to check and see how they're going to meet their global commitments of 25% by 2025. And when they looked at all the different mechanical recycling and all the different chemical recycling, they couldn't find the quality they would need for their caps on fabric care, their handleware for toothbrushes and razor blades, and all the different formats that they make, because they're a very large consumer product company. And so they looked internally on how they could develop a technology. And so Dr. John Lehman worked feverishly for a few years and came up with the solvent recycling process. PureCycle Technologies then obtained a license from Procter & Gamble to be able to commercialize that. Now, it's not a cheap technology to just go out and drop in And so we worked on getting a bond at first, which helped us build the construction of the pilot plant, which helped us make samples for the consumer product companies to test and see that this is a material that they could use. And that helped us obtain more funding that allowed us to show the marketplace that we have demand and supply to build out even more infrastructure, which allowed us to go public in March of 2021 this year. So with that, we're currently in full construction of building the first commercial plant in Ironton, Ohio, and we've already announced and started breaking ground on the second commercial plant, which will be in Augusta, Georgia. And so when I think of the Carolinas, you're kind of sandwiched between our two plants, which are going to draw and demand a lot of polypropylene. So hopefully we can find lots of suppliers within the Carolinas and be a great market for polypropylene going forward. So we will be commercial about, kind of like Holly mentioned, at the end of 2022, that they'll have their plant. We're going to have our plant starting in the middle of 2022, decommissioning, debugging all the little wrinkles that we may have, starting it up commercially with an anticipated date of fourth quarter 2022 to have the first line up and running. But as I mentioned, I have a much more difficult, I guess, goal than Eastman Chemical. I've got to get to 1 billion pounds by 2025, and a lot of people think that that's crazy. I will want to point out that my team that I've hired over the summer has gone out and started to meet with all different kinds of lanes of supply, and we've already identified 1.6 billion pounds of polypropylene, and we know not all of that's being recycled. So we've been working feverishly, and just today it will be publicly announced that the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland, Ohio's professional football team is converting all their service wear to polypropylene, and PureCycle will be recycling that. So that's a really exciting announcement. So part of, I mentioned before, to make a sustainable system or to make enticement for companies like PureCycle to invest millions and millions of dollars into recycling is getting critical mass of a material that's identifiable. Today at most sporting events, music festivals, theater shows, performances across and events across conferences across the United States have multiple formats of serviceware in it. And that makes it very difficult for the economics to recycle it. It puts in the need for sortation systems, and those facilities aren't always serviced in each city by the local MRF system. And so it almost needs its own system in many places. And so we've taken it upon ourselves through advocacy and partnerships, very much like Eastman, with different entities to go out and work with us on collecting these materials as we entice companies into looking at creating kind of a critical mass within their own facilities to make it economical to recycle. So this is what our Ironton facility will look like when it's complete. So the little letter F there is our pilot plant that exists there today, and my next slide will show what that looks like. It's kind of amazing. Plant number 1, though, is actually a pre-processing plant, and I'll talk about what that means in pre-processing and why we're doing that. And 3 and 4 is the warehouse for finished goods and the silos and all the rest of the infrastructure for our facility. This is our pilot plant. It has over a mile worth of piping. As I mentioned, we're doing a solvent recycling of extracting the contaminants out of there. It's kind of like a dry cleaning process where the solvent goes through your synthetic clothes and cleans out all the contaminants. The solvent goes through the polypropylene and actually separates the additives of colorant, the additives like in carpet, as Holly mentioned, that could be a great supply for us as well, of anti-stain material additives or anti-fire additives and things like that that would not make that polymer food grade contact material. We remove that and purify it. And so that's why we call it a purification technology, and hence the PureCycle name. So when I look at how we're going to get to 1 billion pounds, I look at all the different opportunities, and this is kind of a map of the EPA's region, and we've been talking to the EPA in each of the regions and on a national scale and talking about where's their opportunity. And so that first pre-processing plant that I talked about is really us being able to take in mixed 3 through 7. So I heard Clearpath talk about how they are taking in some mixed materials and then making a 2 through 7 bale. I would be very interested in buying that 2 through 7 bale and putting it through my pre-processing and mining the polypropylene. When we think about what's in a 3 through 7, we see, thanks to the Recycling Partnership and their assessment, about 50% of that material is polypropylene. We've actually already been sorting from MRFs all over the country, both the segregated polypropylene bales and the commingled bales, to get an assessment of what that is. We've seen rates as high as 60% and rates as low as 20% polypropylene, but we're seeing an average somewhere between 30 and 50% polypropylene in those bales today. And so we're trying to target the ones that have the higher yields for us. We see things like number 5 bales having anywhere from a 50 to 70% yield on polypropylene. So it's not that much different, and it's a lot more expensive. So we also look at it as a way to de-risk and increase supply to us and lower cost overall for us. So we're excited about that. But we're also going after other, what I call post-consumer but not non-curbside collected material. So like Eastman, we have a relationship with Circular Polymers. In fact, we have enough supply contracts to fill our first and almost our second line, and we have more than our second and part of our third line when we do start to build the third line in letter of intents from suppliers. So we are moving the needle quickly, and we're moving the needle on materials that are being landfilled today. So we're working on streams like raffia material, dog food bags, things with heavily print that mechanical recyclers can only make a gray out of, and also might have the odor of the dog food that was in there going with the resin that certain consumer product companies might not like, that we remove. In fact, the odor of Pure Cycles resin is actually less than virgin because we're taking so many of the additives out. So to date, we've ran both curbside separated material through our plant and our pre-processing, and we've ran bales of 3 through 7, and we've come out with this crystal clear pellet that you see through this entire process. So it's really exciting that we've been able to test both those types of streams, and we've even tested stadium trash, both mixed stadium trash and separated stadium trash, and we were able to do that, and hence why we went after a major sports team. And we went after the one in Ohio because that's our first plant is in Ohio. Very excited about that. And so the other thing we ran, like I mentioned, the circular polymers, we ran black trade show carpet that we actually used at one of the conferences that we were able to exhibit at prior to COVID. Now we're mostly virtual these days, but hopefully in the future we'll be exhibiting at some other face-to-face conferences. And of course, we wouldn't want to see that carpet go to waste. We want to see it recycled. So this is an example of black carpet that we had at the trade show that we recycled into a perfectly crystal clear polypropylene. So very excited that it makes it like virgin material. So from curbside material to even if we had a glut of material from the mechanical recycled that's gray, we could actually take pellets from other mechanical recycled companies for polypropylene that might have a soft market at a particular time because there's a glut of virgin material and they start offering lower prices, and companies that have mechanically recycled can't sell against that without making a higher quality. We could be a good end market for that. And these are some examples of materials that were created from our pilot plant. So here on the far left, we've got 100% virgin material, and in the center, you have 100% Pure Cycles materials. So you can see there's really no difference in the quality of the product. And of course, we've signed up a partner to add additives back for particular products. So if a consumer product company needs that translucency of using a clarifier, we can add a clarifier, and our partner is Milliken, which happens to be in South Carolina. and has been a great asset to us in running all different kinds of formats. And in fact, they ran these injection molded tubs that you might see, you know, on the far left. You might get sandwich meat in a tub very similar to that. And then on the far right, they ran bottles for us. So they have capabilities of running different formats of our resin, or our resin into different formats to show the versatility of what we can do. And so that's pretty much it about PureCycle. You know, still to come, commercial in 2022. We'll probably start procuring material. In fact, the agreements we have in place with suppliers today start as early as January 2022 to procure and start to store material through the end of 2022, where some of our suppliers will start supplying us in December of 2022. So we're happy to talk to you. This is my contact information. I've taken it upon myself to not only go out and talk about sustainability and create an LCA and an ESG report for my company, but to also make sure we're sustainable by having the feed. So all the procurement team reports to me. So I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested in supplying polypropylene in the future to PureCycle. And so I guess now we'll go to questions. I hope there's lots.
Yes, Tamsen, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I've got one question specifically for you, and then I want to bring Holly back and have everybody talk for a minute.
Okay.
So what will you do with the polypropylene residues in your process?
Great question. I actually just had a visit by Holly's procurement team this week, actually, where they are picking up the sorted material we've done on all the R&D bales, and we rebaled the PET because a good chunk of what was in those PET bales were thermoforms and cups. And so neither of those are something that the mechanical recyclers really want to put into their system. Some of them can handle a percentage of it, but predominantly that's what it is. And so we also saw a lot of colored PET, and that's another thing mechanical PET recyclers aren't as attractive to. So we're excited to hear back from them, but we are talking to PET recyclers, HDP recyclers, and chemical recyclers about the residue after we sort and rebale the HDP and the PET. So we're mining the polypropylene for us. We're rebaling the HDP and the PET to resell. And hopefully the resell isn't going to be about just the monetary value of that material, but it's actually a bargaining chip that I'm going to use to try to swap with other companies that I think have waste as well for the polypropylene. So that's another thing I'm trying to do, is entice companies that aren't sorting their residue into pods of recyclables, because we always had a lot of that material at Envision. And quite frankly, we were selling a lot of the residue material and it was going over to China in some cases. And they actually stopped sorting some of the materials because of the Chinese sort. And so I'm hoping we can open that door back up and tell companies like Envision and others that, hey, sort the polypropylene and we'll swap it with you for the high density. So I hope that answers the question. We don't want to have waste. And in fact, there's waste from our purification process where we take out the polyethylene, which might be a copolymer that wasn't made in the reactor of the virgin resin company, but actually made by a compounder. And so they might have added plasticizers or polyethylenes, and we'll remove those. And so that could be a great feed into chemical recycling. I know Green Mantra makes waxes out of materials like that. We've been in contact with them. And then the actual additives where the colorants are in there, we've been in talks with companies like cement manufacturers to have a filler for them as well. So we're hoping to get as much to a zero waste as possible. It's a long answer. I hope I answered it enough for you guys.
That was great. I've got one more for you before we bring Holly back.
Sure.
It sounds like the solvent may be rather toxic. How is the waste solvent being managed?
Oh, there's no waste solvent. We're recycling it. And so maybe over the course of a year, there might be less than a percentage point evaporated, but it's a closed loop system. And so we're using very little solvent because we clean it up over and over again. And through the purification in each of the stages, the final stage, we go into an extrusion, but in that extrusion where we're making the pellets, we're doing a vacuum in that extrusion where we're actually capturing that solvent back that's maybe still as a parts per billion residue so that we can be food grade. And so we're even capturing that and putting it back into the system. And so our resin will not have that solvent in the resin anymore, nor will we be dumping it out into the market someplace as a toxic waste.
Fantastic. So if Holly is still around, I'd love to bring her back for just a second. All right. I think this may end up being our final question, and it'll be the same question for both our presenters. I'm going to start with Holly. So Tamsen had a really cool timeline at the beginning of her presentation. Do you feel like the Chinese sword may have accelerated some of the ideas and processes for how to handle some of the plastic, maybe raising the awareness of the problem and kind of putting a little urgency to the issue?
I think it absolutely has. And in some cases, you can look at this and kind of bemoan the fact that it was external forces that have created the demand for this. But the other option that we have is to really look at this and say, what a great opportunity we have to start to manage this material domestically. And what a great opportunity we have to start to build infrastructure to be able to handle these materials domestically, which is creating the streams that will work for PureCycle, which will help to create the streams that will work for Eastman and will help us to really start to expand that. So yeah, it's been a big part. And, you know, I think in some cases, you know, sometimes if you don't listen, you have to feel, I think is what my husband's grandma used to tell him. And maybe that's what we're all kind of going through right now. Like we didn't really listen. We didn't listen what the planet was doing. So we've had to feel a little bit of pain. But hopefully we're going to come out of this with a more robust and a vivacious recycling system than we've ever had before. I'm going to choose to be the optimist, Mike.
Well, and I would add that I think both the Chinese sword and the reality of waste, not just plastics, but waste going into the ocean, has put an urgency to do something about that. And with that, I mean, there's been multiple technologies, both on how you collect materials out of the ocean or stopping materials from going in the ocean, as well as technologies to be able to process these things. And so I'm just excited because if you think about it, you know, we haven't really changed our MRF systems until recently. We've got robots showing up now to make the quality of bales that the MRFs can produce better. And we've got better IR scanning systems. We even got more advanced IR scanning systems to be able to identify some black plastics, right? And it's going to take time for the investment to transition over to all the MRFs on these types of technologies, but I get excited and hopeful, like Holly, that we've now created an impetus to make that happen, and hopefully before it's too late, right? So as I mentioned, this is kind of the last decade before we were going to get to that pinnacle point of consuming more than what the earth can produce. And so I tell people it's like the teenage years. It's expensive right now. Recycled isn't more economical than virgin materials, but I anticipate virgin materials will go up in cost as they become less available, and then recycled materials will get collected more and the cost will come down, and maybe the two will meet and we'll have a perfect world going forward. We can hope anyway.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left and one question that came in, so we're going to speed around this. Do you produce any recycled material that are pre-sterilized by gamma irradiation for the use in biopharmaceutical field?
I'll let Holly answer that first.
Do we produce any recyclement? If I'm understanding the question, could we utilize material that has been pre-sterilized, or can we produce material that has recycled content that could be qualified to go into pharma? And I don't know that that decision is up to us. I feel like there's going to be a lot of FDA involvement right now. So when you start thinking about the requirements for recycled content, We probably can't pass that with how the guidelines are written today, but we believe that there's a lot of opportunity for education with the FDA so that we can start to incorporate recycled content that's coming from different technologies that might have a different hazard profile than maybe a mechanical stream would. And so we think there's a lot of opportunity for education, but I don't think that's hit yet, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah, and I would say the same. I mean, I really think based on the results of finished materials and all the testing that we've done, I'm hoping that we can get to that place, because I do think we make an extremely high quality resin that I think would be perfect for those applications. But I also think there's a huge amount of material in both what Holly could consume and what we could consume. And we are actually, one of our LOIs is from a source like that. And we've been working diligently on the pre-processing that we would have to do to be able to sort that. We're working with lots of different sorting manufacturers on being able to separate materials after they've been autoclaved, and then to be able to sort them and then make a good product out of it. Quite frankly, our purification process, if it was all combined together, it would clean it up. But if I don't pre-sort it, then I don't make it an opportunity for somebody else to recycle that stuff. So at the end of the day, if I need to get to the 1 billion pounds with commingled material just to get the polypropylene out that way, I will, but that won't be the most economical and fruitful way from us to produce the material. And so we're working diligently on technologies to be able to sort those type of materials. And I anticipate we're going to make it happen.
Fantastic. So we are out of time, but Holly, Tamsen, thank you both so much. Super exciting information. I think Wendy is coming up next, but be sure to reach out to Holly and Tamsen if you have more questions, or if you want to do some more work and collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you. Great seeing all of you again. I can't wait till it's in person.
Definitely.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Yes, agreed. Thank you both. And this is Sandy, not Wendy. I'm going to kick off our last session of the day. Wendy is working through a little technical issue with her laptop, and I think she'll be able to join us back here in just a minute. But for our last scheduled session for today, we are talking policy drivers for plastics recycling. So we have another 3 speakers that we're excited to introduce you to. So I'm going to jump right into it. And first off, we have Cara Pachiro from the Association of Plastics Recyclers. And I hope I did your name justice, Cara. Let's see if she can get her camera.
Here I am.
There you are.
Andy. Yes, you did that just fine. Just let me share my screen here. And I'm hitting, oh, I think that should work now. Let's see. Seems to be just a slight delay.
I see it.
Oh, you can see it okay now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. It's not showing up for me. I'm not sure why. Just a second, let me check. One more thing. Well, either way, so you can see my slides here.
Sure can, yeah.
Okay, great. I'll get started. So thank you again. And as Sandy said, my name is Cara Pachiro. I'm the Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs for the Association of Plastic Recyclers. So what I'll be talking about today, I'll give everybody just a very brief introduction into who we are at APR. And then I know that I only have 15 minutes, and when we get into state laws and EPR and federal legislation, you know, you can really get down into the weeds and take a lot of time. So I even put a little more content in those slides than I'll talk about now, but I know that these will be available to everybody afterwards. And so I wanted to include enough information that if you wanted to refer back, you know, it would be helpful, but I'll try to stick to my 15 minutes here. And then of course, I'll go into some APR programs we have to boost demand. So APR is an international trade association. We're the voice of plastic recycling. The core of who we are at APR, those are the recyclers or the reclaimers, of course. But we have all kinds of affiliate members too, including consumer brand companies, equipment manufacturers, label manufacturers, basically any packaging component manufacturer, other trade groups, and testing labs, all the stakeholders in the recycling industry. And we do always really like to point out that we're the only North American organization that's focused exclusively on plastics recycling. That's what we do day in and day out. We work with a lot of other great trade groups that are focused on different commodities, that are focused on specific resins or recycling in general, but we are the only North American trade group exclusively on plastic recycling. So these are APR's primary goals. Everything that we do is to increase the supply and enhance the quality of recycled plastics. We're always working to expand the demand. That's so important. We're talking about that today. And also to communicate the value of recycled plastics. So here are a few of our programs at APR. The core of what we do, I said the core of our membership, those are the recyclers or the reclaimers. And our core program is the APR Design Guide for Plastic Recyclability. So it's a series of guidelines for packaging designers and engineers so that they can design their packaging to successfully make it through the current recycling infrastructure. We have a training program where we bring this directly to consumer brands and manufacturers. We have one going on today. I just finished up right before I logged on here with Kurt Kozart doing a training program. So those are customized to fit your specific needs. We can start with a recycling 101 and then really get into the details of the design guide. And we also have case studies for your specific packaging. Of course, test methods are included in our design guide, and we have a recognition program where we recognize those companies that have developed packaging components and packages that are recyclable. We have a large or a strong communication and advocacy arm. I'll mention our position statements in a little more detail in a moment, but if you're interested in checking those out, I included the link here. I'll also be talking about APR's Recycling Demand Champions campaign and PCR certification a little bit later in the presentation. And of course, we're always continuously working to develop resources for the industry. So I mentioned our position statements. Again, I put the URL there. You can also go to plasticrecycling.org, of course, and click on our library and then position statements. You'll see these are the top 3 that pop up. And I do want to point out that as we're talking about content standards today or mandated content, APR was the first plastics-related organization to support mandatory recycled content way back in 2006. That wasn't always a popular position to support, but we've always felt that's very important to support the growth of the plastic recycling industry, of course. So now I'll just go into a couple state content laws that are currently in effect in California and Washington. So we work with Houston Magnani Associates in California. They are lobbyists and they represent us there. So we are always very involved in California legislation. So this was actually signed into law in September 2020. And it requires minimum content in beverage containers subject to the CRV. So you can see on your screen there that they have a laddered approach, which is always something that we talk about when we meet with staff ahead of time, when they're considering the different bills. We recommend, of course, a laddered approach based on data for supply. You can't just come up with these random percentages and timelines and expect the supply to be there. So a laddered approach is very important. You'll see that small manufacturers are exempt and there are penalties for non-compliance. So in Washington, there's Washington State 5022. This law is very recently effective as of July 2021. You'll see it requires content in plastic bottles, trash bags, household cleaning, and personal care products. You'll see that they also have a laddered approach similar to the California law. And they go into a little more detail. So trash bags no less than 10%, and that's a laddered approach. And then household cleaning and personal care products have a little bit different percentages. And we're also glad to see that. That shows, you know, an understanding that the different resins and different packaging types require different percentages and different timelines. And APR is on the advisory committee for this. Kate Eagles sits on the committee for us, and of course Steve Alexander is involved as well. So we were happy to participate with that. So content in context of extended producer responsibility or EPR bills, we've seen those pass in Oregon and Maine. If you are an APR member and had a chance to attend our October member meeting a couple weeks ago, David Alloway gave a great presentation about this bill, or about this law that was signed in August, so very recently. And recycled content mandates are not a part of this law, but you'll see that producer responsibility organizations will set and pay fees based on covered products sold in the state. So those fees are eco-modulated, and you can see the different details there. Maine also signed into law an EPR bill in 2021. It also does not include content mandates, but you can see we kind of pulled something from that law here. There will be an increased amount of post-consumer recycled content in packaging material used by producers. So now go into a little bit about some federal legislation. We do also work with a government relations firm based in DC. They serve as our representation and lobbyists on Capitol Hill, and we work with them very closely. You can see these are just some of the bills that we monitor very closely with them. And then I did want to point out the two at the bottom, Break Free from Plastic Pollution and the Clean Future Act. Those are two specific bills that include mandated content. Although they are just pending, of course, and we really don't expect to see a lot of progress with this in the near term, but again, we are closely monitoring. You can see that they also both include a laddered approach, like I mentioned, and we obviously feel that that's very important. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act creates requirements for waste and recycling collection systems. And then the Clean Future Act establishes PCR content standards for beverage containers. So now to just go into a few APR programs that boost demand. Obviously, demand is so important, and we understand that it monetizes the whole system. And at APR, we really do focus on PCR. A lot of our members, of course, process both post-consumer and post-industrial material, but we really feel that it's important to focus on PCR because that's where the system needs a boost. You know, of course, post-industrial material, that's really part of the manufacturing process and really doesn't need a boost. It doesn't need a lot of support. That's practices that are going on every day. But of course, that post-consumer material, that material from homes and businesses, this is where we need the boost. This is where we need support. So that's why we feel it's so important to focus more on PCR at APR. So I mentioned earlier that we're always working to communicate the value of recycled plastics. That's something that as the VP of Communications, I'm working to do every day. This is a valuable material, and we also really have been trying to push the message that it's important to decouple the value of PCR from virgin resin and really see that post-consumer material is the key ingredient to circularity, and it allows those consumer brand companies to serve their consumers. Consumers have shown through many surveys that I've seen that they want their packaging to be sustainable. They want it to be made with recycled material. So they're serving their customer or their consumers this way, and they're also upholding those commitments that they've made. And as I mentioned earlier, we've supported mandated recycled content since 2006. We really feel that's key. We recently launched a PCR certification program, and we're in the final steps of launching the second phase of that. So look out for that news coming very early in 2022. Right now, this is how our current PCR certification program works. APR sets the definitions and guidelines, and we have endorsed the certifying bodies. So then reclaimers hire those endorsed certifiers, the reclaimer is audited, and then APR promotes that certified PCR. It's a very simple program, but it has a lot of bang for the buck. And as I mentioned, phase 2 is coming soon, and that will be package certification. We recently finished up year 3. Well, you can see that was 2019 to 2020, and we also have continued this program since then. But I love to show this year-end report from year 3 of the APR Recycling Demand Champions campaign. Also a very simple program that you can see really has a lot of results. So in year 3, our program resulted in an additional 174.4 million pounds of additional PCR in the market. So basically, all of these companies that you see on the left side of your screen sign a commitment that they will increase their usage of PCR in the coming year. You can do that in a few different ways. You can include additional PCR in packaging that already does include PCR, but just increase the value. You can develop new packaging or new applications for PCR, but you can also purchase products that go in your facilities that are manufactured with PCR. So lots of ways to show your commitment to the growth. And then finally, I mentioned that the APR Design Guide for Plastic Recyclability is really the core of what we do at APR, and we understand that design for recyclability is key. We've really seen the use of our guidelines just continue to grow really around the world. And I just like to end with this quote from Steve Alexander. You may have seen this before, or kind of something like this in some recent publications too, but this specific quote here is on the APR website. We sent in our public comments to a recent Senate EPW circular economy hearing. And basically, he says that consumer product companies really need to understand that they're their own suppliers. They have to design their packaging so that it's easier to recycle, because that is the material that then goes into that PCR. So it's difficult for recyclers to manufacture a clean supply of recycled resin if the stream of material they receive is contaminated with non-recyclable material. So again, consumer brand companies are really their own suppliers here. So I know we have 2 more presenters, and then we'll take questions after that. Make sure to visit our website here, of course, and you can email me anytime afterwards if you think of questions. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at APR Recycles. We also have a podcast called Recycled Content, and you can get that wherever you get your podcasts. So I encourage you to check that out.
Thank you so much, Kara. And I love that quote as kind of a thought for ending things on. So I think, as you suggested, we'll keep moving with our 2 other panelists, and then we'll circle back to questions at the end. So I want to introduce, next up, we have Tiana Lightfoot Svensson from the U.S. Plastics Pact. And we will get her slides up and ask her to join us on camera and audio, and we'll take it away from there.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yay, victory. And can you see my screen? All right, let's go ahead and get
Yes.
started.
See your screen.
Thank you all so much for being here today. It is actually my birthday, so I'm going to put on my birthday crown because I'm a giant child and I think this is some sort of national holiday still. And I'm just so pleased to spend this day with you. And I'm grateful to Dee and Matt and the whole team who's been working tirelessly to put this conference together. And if you haven't had a chance to connect with Ashley Jenkins, she is one of my most favorite people in the whole world. It is an absolute delight to work with her. So I'm thankful for her to connecting me to this conference. And Kara, it was so nice to hear from you and APR. APR is a strong partner to the U.S. Plastics Pact, and we use all of the resources provided by APR, such as the Design Guide for Plastics Recyclability, in our decision making. Earlier today, you heard from Holly from Eastman and Tamsen from PureCycle, and both of those organizations are a part of the U.S. Plastics Pact. The pact is led by the Recycling Partnership and the World Wildlife Fund and is part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Global Plastics Pact network. So we have this global viewpoint that is then applied and tailored to the U.S. market. And you can see a map here of the other plastics pacts around the world. We work most closely with Canada because there's a shared market between the US and Canada, but we connect with each of these groups to share learnings and gain their insights on how we can address the plastics challenge. Because as we know, it's too big and too important to do alone. And so we're working to unite businesses, government groups, not-for-profit organizations, academic and research institutions. And through that, we've created a roadmap, which is our national strategy to a circular economy, and it contains 4 targets, which we will get to in just a second. And as part of that, we measure.
Fiona, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Two quick things. We're seeing your sort of notes version of the PowerPoint. So I don't know if you wanted to switch screens just so we see the slides.
There you go.
In full screen.
Thank you.
And
is that better?
We don't see you on video. That might be on purpose, but if you have your birthday tiara, we don't want to miss out.
There you go.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
You'd think that I would have this down by now, but no, I still need some grace and patience as we navigate differing platforms. So thank you so much for those notes. And so we're working as a consortium to address the issue of plastic. And these are our 4 targets. And so the first one is to define a list of packaging that is problematic or unnecessary by the end of the year. And then we'll work to take measures to eliminate the items on that list. And so it's important to note that the list we're going to publish applies to U.S. Plastics Pact activators and is a voluntary effort. And so if other businesses are inspired to work on their plastics portfolio and reduce the types of plastic they're using and make sure that what they're selecting is something that truly can be recycled and processed by a MRF and materials that are not harmful to human health and the environment. So looking at all of the different criteria to try to have the best possible product and packaging. So our second target is that 100% plastic packaging will be reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2025. And so a lot of our activators are doing very novel things in this space. One example I really love is Colgate-Palmolive has invented a toothpaste tube that is made out of only one type of plastic with the intention of making it recyclable. And Colgate knows that they can't just create Tom's of Maine toothpaste tubes that are recyclable because the folks at the MRF aren't going to have time to pick it up and go, oh, Tom's of Maine, that's great, let's recycle this. Oh, a different brand. We need to make sure that goes in the trash. There's simply not the time for that. And so they've open sourced how they did it so that other producers of toothpaste tubes can switch over and start making recyclable tubes. So that's one of my favorite examples there of not just focusing on the business aspect, but how are we going to win together, and how are we going to share our findings and push each other towards closing the loop on plastics. Target 3 is undertake ambitious actions to effectively recycle or compost 50% of plastic packaging by 2025. And again, that's something that we would encourage everyone to do, but is applicable to our activators. And then target 4 is a bit novel. So all of these goals are fairly consistent amongst the plastic packs throughout the globe. But in target 4, where we have an average of 30% recycled content, what's novel here is we've also included responsibly sourced bio-based content as an option for achieving this goal. And all of these goals are interconnected, and they need each other in order to be actualized so that we can reduce the use of virgin plastic and the negative impacts on the environment. So this is a lockup of our activators, and we have over 100 cities, counties, small businesses, multinational corporations, resin manufacturers, groups all across the plastics value chain working towards these 4 targets. And you'll see PureCycle on there, and you'll see Target and Walmart and big brands and big names that you know, but you'll also see startup companies. And so no matter if a group has a 1-person staff or tens of thousands of people working for them, every activator has the same seat at the table and the same opportunity to participate and share and grow our organization. So we're only a little over a year old, but in that time we've grown from initial launch of 62 activators to more than 100. We've defined our scope and what we plan to accomplish during our time. We've made those relationships and formed connections with folks all around the world trying to address these issues. We published our roadmap to 2025, which I think is very important because a lot of groups say they want to do something about these issues, but we've actually outlined what our plans are to address them in the roadmap. And we have 11 work streams. We'll be adding more as time goes on. And so those are focused on different topics and have representation from every point in the process in the value chain so that we have a balanced voice and approach when we're navigating these issues. And we've defined the criteria and how we're going to determine what resins or what formats appear on that problematic materials list. So every single group has an important role to play in the pact, and we would love to have activators of all types join us. In particular, I'd love to see groups from the Carolinas and especially local governments, because too often cities and counties are responsible for this issue, and it's just this heavy weight on your shoulders. My background is working for a city government, and you're so under-resourced, and the residents expect recycling and they expect it to be done well. However, as Tamsen discussed earlier with National Sword, and then you have COVID, and COVID's impacting staffing levels, and there's already a nationwide shortage of trash and recycling drivers and people who have commercial driver's license in general. And so you have all these layers and all these challenges, and the groups that are collecting this material and sending it to MRF are having to pay for it. And of course, no one wants their taxes raised, and the programs are inconsistent across the country. So that's a challenge we face because MRFs have different capabilities. So some MRFs are able to accept certain types of resins and some aren't. So it's phenomenal to see the work the Recycling Partnership is doing to provide grants to recycling facilities and grants to communities to make sure that those resources are available. But ultimately, the city and state and county governments are still oftentimes responsible for the cost and responsible for educating the public. And so it's wonderful to see representation from government activators because so many businesses aren't familiar with that side and what you're experiencing in the communities every single day. And so the PACT, for example, had a virtual MRF tour, and so many product designers had never been to a recycling facility, and they didn't know the challenges faced by the MRFs. And so it's just wonderful to have those voices at the table. And so no matter what type of activator a group is, everyone is expected to support the 4 targets in the way that they best can. Not everyone's recycling or not everyone's producing resins, but where applicable, and weave those into the organizational goals. We have monthly meetings that are an hour and a half long, and it's great to have representation there, and especially with our work streams to contribute those knowledge and those insights. And then we do have a reporting requirement. So once a year, our activators will submit data, and that deadline has passed for this year, and our baseline report will come out in March. And for the groups that are making plastics or recycling plastics, there's very set and specific metrics that align with our 4 targets. And then for not-for-profit organizations, it's more qualitative data that's submitted. And so groups like City of Phoenix is so inspiring in their Reimagine Phoenix program. They're working to create a whole facility for entrepreneurs in the circular economy and use feedstock from MRFs and challenge entrepreneurs to come up with solutions. And so it's great to have both that hard data as well as those case studies and those narratives on how we're connecting with the public and with business leaders. And of course, this is not a place for solicitation. So a lot of our activators do business with each other or may do business with each other in the future, but it's not a place for sales pitches, because we have goals and targets and things we are working to accomplish. And so everyone there on our team is committed to collaboration and cohesive work. We never duplicate efforts. So if there's another organization that's working on something, then we'll use that data to our advantage, but nothing we do is duplicative. And we maintain confidentiality as far as we're not going to throw any one group under the bus. So when we share data, it's aggregated data. And that data is used to drive all of our decisions. And then it will be disclosed publicly. And of course, we adhere to antitrust rules and anything that would keep us above board with federal laws and that type of governance. So I mentioned the tracking. And so our activators use the World Wildlife Fund's Resource Plastic Footprint Tracker and input that data. And there's no fee for this. And it's an incredibly useful tool because it's allowing companies to measure their footprint. So it's something that they have to do as part of PACT membership, but it's also taking that data and those findings back to the company and using those measures to further improve their work. So the work streams that we have right now, one is focused on policy, and we do support policy as far as EPR and deposit return systems. However, it's important to note that we're not a lobbying organization. We're not going to go and knock on a congressperson's door or endorse a particular piece of legislation, but many of our activators do that type of work. And so it's important to come together as a group and to share those pressures, because it would be so helpful to have federal policy in particular on the circular economy. And we welcome that and we want that to happen. However, that's not currently in place. And so there's not consistency amongst the states, and there's not consistency amongst cities and counties and MRF sheds. And so we can't wait for that. And even though there's no federal policy in place right now, if we woke up tomorrow and there was one, we would still have a lot of work to do. So policy is not a silver bullet. It's important and it's necessary, and please, let's push forward with it. But there's also enforcement, and there's also, well, say you set a standard for a certain amount of PCR, so you want to have recycled content in products. But if that supply is not available, then that's not feasible. So we have to make sure we're recycling and getting that material kept in the system. We have another group focused on reuse pilots and innovations. Wonderful work being done there. One I'd like to highlight is Clorox and their partnership with El Gramo, because so often reuse platforms are expensive. And so what Clorox is testing out in the Northeast is where you have a container for Clorox or Pine Sol, and you fill it up and you pay for the liquid. So however much you put in there is how much you pay. So you're paying for the product and not the packaging, and they're making it accessible to all types of consumers, including low-income consumers, which I think is really novel and wonderful, to make sure that the circular economy is accessible to everyone. And I mentioned the problematic and unnecessary materials list. We've had a team for over a year now that's been focused on creating that scope and criteria and looking at the EPA and California Prop 65 and the litter data we see from Keep America Beautiful and Tides, and weaving it all together to try to come up with a list of items where we're going to get the most bang for our buck, and we're going to identify the biggest issues to tackle. Another great group is our new on-pack labeling group. And I think this one is so important because I remember when I worked for a city government, we would do inspections of the recycling carts, and there was always a dirty diaper. Always, every street you would find something like that. And you would look at it and think, why on earth did someone put that in there? Did they think that this is a composting bin? Did they think, oh, well, it has plastic and plastic's recyclable? And some of it may be confusion around on-pack labeling, because while the diapers themselves aren't recyclable, sometimes the box they come in has a label that says please recycle. And of course that label means the box. It doesn't mean the diapers, and certainly not used diapers. But we can see how a resident would be confused by that. And so communicating effectively through labeling is so important, because even if you have the strongest city program to educate residents on how to recycle, you can't be with someone every time they need to toss something in the recycling cart. And so having that messaging there, and so it's easy to understand, and there are graphics, because you might have someone who has a predominant language other than English, and working through all of that is just a tremendous lift. And then of course we have our composting team focused on bio-based materials, and we have so many challenges with recycling infrastructure, and I applaud the work the Recycling Partnership is doing and the price tag they put on infrastructure and outlining the steps that need to be taken in order to get us where we need to be. But composting needs even more attention, because very few places have comprehensive systems with curbside collection of composting and really solid facilities for that material. So this is a breakdown of the cost and responsibilities for U.S. Plastics Pact activators. And you'll notice it's free for nonprofits, universities, and government activators. And the reason for that is we know that nonprofit budgets and city government budgets are very strapped, and you're being asked to do more and more with less and less money all the time. And especially during COVID, so many recycling program outreach budgets were slashed. And so if there is a government group that wants to join the pact, there is no cost other than your time or commitment. And then for businesses, the cost is based on the annual US sales revenue, and that's tiered. But no matter the size of an organization, profit or not for profit, each group is bringing dynamic leadership and creating those cross-value partnerships, which is so helpful and necessary to moving forward and having the same access to work streams and to the decisions that we're making. For small businesses that are owned or founded by Black, Indigenous, or people of color, we have a grant program which is generously sponsored by Target. So we would welcome anyone who might qualify for this program to reach out to us to make sure that we have sufficient representation. And so for BIPOC owned and led businesses that have less than $1 million US sales revenue, the grant will fully cover the fees for activators. And then if it's up to 50 million, then we subsidize it and greatly reduce
the cost, and that's for the duration of an activator's time in the pack. So as we're moving forward, we've launched new work streams. We've focused on our Target 3 strategy, and I mentioned our baseline report. So that will be coming in early 2022, as well as our problematic materials list. And so if anyone has any questions about the U.S. Plastics Pact, I would love to have a conversation with you and hear about the work that you are doing to close the loop on plastics. And of course, we have channels on Twitter and on LinkedIn, so we'd love to connect to you there as well. So thank you so much for your time. It is tremendous to be here with you today and talk about these critical issues that are facing us.
Thank you so much, Tiana. It was great to hear about all the work that the Plastics Pact is doing. So we look forward to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. So to keep us moving, I'm going to introduce Alex Schenk. He's from Pepsi, and he's going to talk about Pepsi's PCR commitments. And we're pulling up his slides now, and we'll get Alex in here with us.
I'm making sure everyone can see and hear me. Can I get a verbal affirmative on that?
Affirmative, I can hear you. I can't yet see you. There you are.
Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for having me. I am from South Carolina and went to college in North Carolina, so I'm particularly excited to chat with this group today. And I'm a big Clemson fan, was a big Carolina Panthers fan before the Sam Darnold trade, I guess. But so again, this one really hits home, close to home, and I appreciate the chance to speak. My name's Alex Schenk, and I'm the environmental policy lead for PepsiCo in the U.S. and Canada. Prior to joining PepsiCo, I worked for a political consulting firm handling environmental issues for a number of conservation groups and others, including the World Wildlife Fund and the National Audubon Society. Before that, I worked in the Senate for several years, working in environmental policy for Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska, and also with the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Subcommittee on Oceans, Atmosphere, Fisheries, and Coast Guard. I did a lot of work on plastics and packaging and other similar issues. I've been based in Washington, D.C. for the past 10 years, and I think I've never really seen an interest and a fever pitch around environmental policy like I have over the past 2 to 3 years. You know, this is driven by a number of really seminal issues like climate change and drought and wildfire and others. But you know, working at a food and beverage company, you know, we are not to climate change what a BP and Chevron is. However, you know, despite wanting to be very active in climate, we're never going to be, you know, the leader in that space. Whereas in the packaging and collection world, you know, that's where we can really have a meaningful and profound impact. So that's been among the policies that I work on a major focus of ours, and I'm very proud of the company and its response and leadership in a lot of these, you know, really challenging issues that I think are you know, of critical importance. We're seeing over the last couple of years really a perfect storm on the collection and recycling policy front. A lot of this was touched on by the two speakers before me, but there's sort of two key factors. One is political and budgetary. You know, we have the Chinese national sword policy passes, and which sort of exacerbates and draws a light on some of our recycling challenges and some of the budgetary challenges that states, cities, and municipalities have in funding recycling programs. And while that's happening, in direct parallel, public concern over waste in the environment has really peaked. And in a response to both, you know, some of those budgetary needs and the concern of voters, a lot of these states are moving toward policies to address these. These policies are really in two buckets. The first are producer responsibility policies like extended producer responsibility and deposit return systems. And the second are recycled content mandates, which you know, as noted previously, can be a part of those, but also are moving on their own. Given that recycling is managed at the state level, we're really seeing the fastest moving policy happening there. You know, there are 20 U.S. states that are considering recycling, you know, right now. And I put together this map about a week ago. There are probably 3 more since I put it together. But there are a number of you know, minimum recycled content bills that are moving. 2 have already passed in Washington State and California. And then there are 12 EPR bills currently being considered, with 2 that have already passed in Maine and Oregon. And I think what we're, you know, the interesting shift and dynamic that we're seeing is brand and company and industry response to these bills has shifted over the past few years, which I'll get into in just a moment. So just to take a look at EPR and DRS, you know, EPR has really emerged as the most popular collection policy option in the US right now. You know, supporters of EPR cite, you know, well, sorry, let me back up. You know, when you consider the political viability of these bills, you really need to focus on stakeholder alignment. So, you know, their collection policy affects a broad and variegated group of stakeholders, and all of those groups feel very strongly about how these policies are constructed, including brands and retailers. But EPR really minimizes opposition, you know, not that everyone's in favor of it, but relative to some of the other mainstream policies, it is the one that is most broadly accepted. And there are a few reasons for that. One is it addresses all material in the waste stream. So, you know, when you look at, you know, there are 10 deposit systems operating in the US right now, and a number of those are now considering EPR to kind of close the gap, pass off all of the funding obligations for recycling systems to industry, and it really does appeal to the, you know, the environmental community who want to make sure that we limit you know, leakage into the environment, not just address high value materials. The other big one is EPR's focus on curbside recycling maximizes consumer convenience. It doesn't require a lot of effort from them, and this concept of wish cycling has become really popular and discussed a lot. And the education components of some of these EPR programs are appealing to those who want to put an end to this concept of wish cycling. And then, of course, all of that being considered, you know, that does increase the political viability of EPR bills, and I think that's really why we're seeing movement on that. From the perspective of, you know, a brand, from the brand perspective, you know, I think that there's some important watch outs on some of these EPR bills. The bills that have passed so far in Maine and Oregon are problematic, to say the least. Maine more so than Oregon. As we're a global company, and we look in other markets where we see EPR systems that have done really well, and we're not seeing that trend continuing in the US. And the primary challenge there is governance. We like to see you know, industry managed programs, and what that means is not that the government's not involved, but that the government has statutory authority over the system, but delegates the day-to-day management to brands and others in a producer responsibility organization. And you know, industry really does share the same goals that the government does, which is we want to see recycling rates increase. We also really want to make sure that these programs are managed efficiently, and over time we see recycling rates increase and costs go down. In government-led programs, we've seen that hasn't really been the trend. The other challenge that we're seeing is this trend toward omnibus legislation, which is what we really saw in Oregon, which is an attempt to fold collection programs and collection policy into a bill that addresses everything related to plastics and litter in the environment. And collection, as everybody here knows, is complex and challenging enough without, tacking on all sorts of other more challenging and more controversial programs. The other one is, of course, deposit return systems. They're sort of losing their shine at the moment as EPR is really taking a foothold. We haven't seen a new deposit return program or policy, or legislation really gain traction in quite a while. I think that's pretty much due to the inverse of what makes EPR appealing, which is it's not as convenient for consumers. There are a lot of really strong opponents to deposit policy, and they also tend to be highly expensive and highly complex. So moving on from collection is, we're seeing minimum recycled content standards, and I'll just reiterate what the speakers before me have said, which are MRC standards are designed to increase the demand for post-consumer recycled material by requiring escalating percentages of recycled material put into new products. Here you'll see at the bottom of my screen are the percentages required by both California and Washington State, which are the two minimum recycled content bills that have passed in the US this past year. From the brand perspective, we worry about minimum recycled content standards for a number of reasons. One is that due to our robust commitments, which I'll elaborate upon in just a moment, due to our robust commitments to use higher percentages of recycled content into our products, we worry that recycled content mandates are really trying to solve a problem and create a demand that already exists. Believe me, I feel pressure, on a day-to-day basis to secure more material and to really push our company to use more PCR in our products. Unfortunately, minimum recycled content standards are much easier to pass than collection policy, and we're seeing states who really have interest in boosting recycling rates passing MRC mandates instead of moving forward with collection, and this is creating a demand for PCR that does already exist, but imposes fines when some of this material doesn't necessarily exist. So, without the supply, minimum recycled content standards can place tremendous burdens on companies, their supply chains, and of course the shared pool of the rPET supply that exists. So we need to make sure that recycling rates increase in parallel with the interest in MRC standards and their escalating percentage requirements. Another really big watch out on the MRC side is making sure that we really look at them from on an international scale. If Canada, for example, were to pass a minimum recycled content mandate, which there is chatter about, it would function as the third largest US state, because in so many cases these supply chains reach across borders, and material that is used in Canada comes from the United States and vice versa. So this is a really important thing. In many cases, PepsiCo has really been involved in the policy-making processes around some of these in collaboration with our industry partners and some of our organizations. And our goal here is to make sure that minimum recycled content mandates, if they're moving forward, that they are consistent and that their PCR requirements are consistent with those of corporate goals. We can't use MRC standards and non-compliance penalties as a means of generating funding for recycling systems. And in cases where minimum recycled content standards are going to move and the will is there, we need to make sure that they're set up reasonably and and really do take into consideration market supply for PCR and the availability. So that's we are seeing a growing interest in these standards, and we need to make sure that the collection rates go up so that companies can really adhere to them and make meaningful progress toward their shared, corporate and goals and those of the MRC standards themselves. I mentioned, it really is so wonderful to work for a company that cares so much about these issues and is really working very hard to be a good actor in this space. As recently, in addition to our existing really robust sustainability goals, PepsiCo just released its PepsiCo Positive platform, which is a set of new sustainability goals that really, I think, sets us apart from a number of other companies and other brands. And we're very excited about the direction that this is going. In addition to, plastics and collection, we're focusing on agriculture, on climate change, on water use. And I'd be happy to share with anyone more information about this program. But in particular, we have made a commitment to convert our rPET bottles to 100% recycled, our bottles to 100% recycled material by 2030. And I think that this is a really exciting and bold step by the company, and we look forward to finding ways to enact meaningful policies and where it makes sense and where these policies are moving to achieve these goals, and continuing to find ways to innovate, to design for recyclability and really to be good actors in the supply chain. So it really is a privilege to talk about this with you all, and I appreciate your time. And I know that I'm probably I think I'm the last speaker in a long day, so thanks so much for your attention to this and for your interest in this topic.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I'd like to invite our other two speakers, Tiana and Kara, to join us. And I have a couple of questions that I want to pose to all of you. So first of all, Tiana, I know you mentioned that you all don't do any lobbying work, but maybe to Kara and Alex, do you have any lobbying presence in the Carolinas? And to follow on to that, since the Carolinas are such a leader when it comes to plastics recycling, I can't help but notice that neither of the Carolinas were highlighted in those maps showing, introduced recycling related legislation. Why do you guys think that is? And maybe we can start with Alex.
Sure. We've now talked exhaustively about some of these policies that we're seeing. I think you're seeing them really move in places that, for one, aren't as effective on the recycling side as some of these robust programs in the Carolinas are, and two, you're seeing them in states that are sort of on the political spectrum, really willing to be and anxious to be very disruptive in this space. So you see it start in a handful of states, Oregon, for example, and then you see a trend toward regional proliferation. So you have Maine pass an EPR bill, and now you see Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont. It moves there, and similar in Oregon. Very similarly in Oregon, now you're seeing Washington State consider an EPR bill, and also in California. As far as our lobbying presence, we are a big company, and we take pride in making sure that policies are really achieve strong environmental outcomes. So if these policies are discussed here, I don't anticipate that would happen. We want to make sure that they're done in the right way.
I was muted, sorry about that. I think Alex covered the first question about policy in the Carolinas very well, so I would agree with him completely there. As for a lobbying presence in the Carolinas, right now we only have specific, a lobbyist full-time in California and federal. But we have done lobbying for many years across the whole United States. We do that in a variety of ways. We have a lot of members in the Carolinas, so we will work kind of through our members' lobbying teams that they have within their companies. We also will just simply hire a lobbyist to work in a specific state for one specific issue. We've done that on a number of occasions as well. But I do want to add that we are growing the policy arm of APR in 2022. We plan to hire 2 new people, one being a state lobbyist that can go to, you know, across the whole United States where they're needed. So this is obviously lots of travel involved with that type of position, where you see them going to multiple states even in 1 week. But we're definitely excited to bring someone like that in, and I assume that we'll still have to, even with that person, we'll still have to hire lobbyists in certain states here and there, depending on the issue. And then we're bringing another person in just kind of to work on policy in general and work with us on kind of our full legislative platform.
That's great. And, you know, to continue with sort of the state-by-state policy discussion, and I'm interested to hear from any of you on this. You know, there are 4 states that we've talked about in particular that have passed legislation. There are a lot who have introduced legislation. Are there efforts underway to align these different state-sponsored legislations to kind of ease the ability for a manufacturer to comply when they're selling products, you know, all across the country and all across the globe? Are you guys seeing that, or is it a little bit more piecemeal right now? And maybe I'll let Kara start with that.
Sure, I was just going to say, no, we don't see that. And I think, as Alex mentioned in his presentation, that's part of the problem with recycling legislation that really is, you know, very different in all the states. I mean, of course, you know, you'll see some overlap and common types of bills, but once you dig into the details, there are a lot of differences, and that can be hard to comply with. But I would let Alex comment on that more.
Sure. You know, again, it is a divisive issue, and it depends on a number of things. I mean, are you a company? Are you an NGO? Are you in the waste management industry? Are you working for a government or, you know, state agency? Are you working for a city? And I think as our understanding of these policies grow, I mean, EPR is a relatively new issue in the United States. You're seeing you're seeing a lot of gaps grow, but really I think we're trending toward a lot of alignment. I think, and I think that that's a really good and positive step. You know, we in the U.S. we have a lot of hubris. We want to see things that are uniquely American, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned from how these systems operate in other places. And I know that, you know, Tiana through USPP is taking a look at that, and as are others. So I would encourage, you know, as we move forward, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just need to tailor what we know works for markets and for the country as a whole.
And I'll just add, and that's why we've been pleased to see such a great amount of activity on a federal level too, because that can address that issue. Because largely, as we all know, recycling has been a state-by-state issue. And up until really just a few years ago, we wouldn't see anything on a federal level that really addressed much to do with recycling. So that's been encouraging too, to kind of align things and make, you know, compliance easier.
Yeah, definitely. And Tiana, I want to give you the opportunity if you wanted to add anything to that conversation.
Oh, I would just punctuate that we would welcome a national policy, and it is very much piecemeal, and it makes it very challenging on product manufacturers as well when you have different laws in different states.
So I just want to jump in and say one thing. I just wanted to say one thing on the federal side. You know, the state level understanding of these policies is much more advanced than what we see on the federal level. I think 9 out of 10 offices could not tell you what extended producer responsibility is, and non-deposit state, you know, representatives in non-deposit states probably are just as confused. Developing that understanding is going to be really important over the next few years. and also addressing the challenge of preemption and making sure that the programs at work are allowed to continue working in a way that makes sense.
Great, yeah. And I know we've gone a little bit past our 12:30 mark, but I want to ask one final question to all three of you. Each of your organizations are working on, solutions to really big problems and challenges, and there's a lot of opportunity and positivity around making some of these things work. I'm curious if maybe we could wrap up thinking about, in the short term, like in the next year or so, what are one or two big things that each of your organizations are looking to work on in, say, 2022? And I'll let Tiana maybe go first on that one.
Sure. And so we have very detailed outcomes in our roadmap, but I would say top of mind for us right now is that problematic and unnecessary materials list. And so determining what resins are going to be on there so that our activators can work to remove those items from their portfolios whenever feasible.
That's great. And Kara, how about for APR?
Well, lots of things. One that I mentioned with expanding our policy team, I did want to, I talked about that already, but I just wanted to add in how Alex mentioned that on a federal level, many of those offices really don't understand all the issues with recycling as well as on a state level. So that's a lot of what we do at APR as well. We are constantly meeting with the offices on Capitol Hill to really provide technical resources and try to help them understand these issues. We've even, walked through bills with them line by line, and we'll say, well, this, isn't really going to work. And we kind of walk through everything with them. So that's really important, and we'll be continuing that in 2022. I also mentioned expanding our PCR certification program to include product certification. We're really excited about that. And also, we're partnering with the Recycling Partnership to kind of digitize our APR design guide for plastic recyclability and make it an even more valuable tool. So we're looking forward to expanding that in 2022.
That's great, very busy. And Alex, how about you? Short-term big activities.
Sure. I mean, I talked about some of our sustainability goals through PepsiCo Positive. Those are our North Star. We want to see our glide path towards those goals really improve. And as a part of that, after Maine and Oregon, I think what we'd really like to see in some of these other states that are considering EPR is an industry-led program based on some of these optimal design parameters that we and our partners have developed, so that we can demonstrate, how we can achieve really high recycling rates for all materials in a way that makes sense and is efficient and cost-effective.
That's great. Well, hey, thank all three of you so much. It's been great to kind of end today's session with a bigger picture look at what's going on, how all these pieces kind of fit together, and how the Carolinas can be a part of some of these very big solutions. So thank you again for your time. We really appreciate you being here. And I think all of us on the call look forward to working with all of your organizations moving forward. So now I'm going to turn it over to Wendy Worley. She has some CPRC business updates, and she's going to wrap us up for the day.
Yes, thank you, Sandy, and thank you for pinch hitting for me, as I had some technical difficulties just a moment ago, but we are back on track. And just wanted to thank all of our presenters today, all of our moderators, for your wonderful work in your organizations and in sharing that work with us as the CPRC membership organization here today. I think there's just some incredible energy and work around these issues, and I'm just so proud to be a part of all of it. So from laying the groundwork with understanding where we are in terms of our recovery rate so far, understanding that there are major market expansions in our traditional plastics recycling businesses and industries right here in the Carolinas, talking about the emerging plastic markets that are coming on, just a very exciting time to see new development of ways we can move towards that circular economy. And again, I'll echo what Sandy just said. I really appreciate us closing with the final speakers in our policy drivers discussion. I think it's really exciting, and to echo some of the comments that were made by the speakers, it's an amazing time to be in this industry. I know I've been working in recycling for 20, 25 years. I'm not sure, not counting anymore, but to see this amount of activity at the legislative level, both federal legislation that's introduced as well as across the states, lots of interest on the policy arena. I feel like this is really, we're at a crossroads, and want to invite all of our speakers to further engage both with staff from our group here in North Carolina, from the South Carolina Department of Commerce and the group and our partners there, as well as all of the members and attendees that have joined our call, because I think that we together can work towards some important solutions going forward. So thank you all for that. I will just share also just a few brief things. As you know, the CPRC has been real active in developing a campaign around Your Bottle Means Jobs over the last few years in our existence, and want to acknowledge that because, as we heard even today, despite being very active in this space for so long, we still hear from the markets that they cannot get enough material. And as Carolina's plastic recyclers, they would love to source more material locally here from the Carolinas. So we know that that is an important piece of how to move the needle forward. And the Your Bottle Means Jobs has been an important part of that campaign. We have encouraged that in particular market areas to increase that recycling rate and to recycle more plastic bottles by, through this educational effort, the outreach effort, and have seen a lot of great success. Recently, we turned our attention, and I'll give full credit where credit is due, which is to our South Carolina partners, who really took the lead in developing an engagement exercise to sort of breathe a little bit more life into the Your Bottle Means Jobs campaign by initiating a mascot recycling challenge. And that mascot recycling challenge is to really engage our colleges and universities over the 2 states in plastic bottle recycling, and to encourage them, to make them understand a little bit more, engage with those audiences about the need to recycle plastic bottles, how to do that correctly. So that was the point of this engagement. It is clearly to bring economic and environmental benefits here to the Carolinas, support green jobs. And we had about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so universities who participated in this 7-week challenge. To do so, those universities and colleges were to submit social media posts like you see here from Appalachian State, and create videos in order to further engage with their audience around recycling more. Your Bottle Means Jobs. So we were just thrilled to death to see all the creativity coming in from our colleges and universities. You saw sort of previews of these videos as we were taking a break earlier in our sessions, and just lots of creativity and excitement and engagement, and very pleased to see all of those submissions. We will be announcing a winner to that contest on America Recycle Day on Monday, November 15th. So that is coming soon. stay tuned. There'll be some announcements around that, but certainly want to acknowledge all the work from the universities and from our South Carolina partners who helped reinvigorate that effort. So thank you for that. Stay tuned. We are going to continue to engage on that. And as I close, I just want to say, again, here's our contact information. I only put the two of the contacts from the two states, myself and Ashley Jenkins from the Department of Commerce. But please know we have staff that run deep behind that and are ready to engage on all of these issues, both with the industry players who are looking to work and improve things for our market partners, as well as our partner suppliers, local governments, and other businesses that are supplying material to market. So with that, I'll say please reach out to us. Please continue the engagement. We will certainly do that as well with you all. Please follow Your Bottle Means Jobs. You'll see all of our Instagram and other social media channels there. We really appreciate your time today and look forward to meeting again. We will likely have another meeting, hopefully in person next year, and have some engagement around that. We'd like to couple it with some tours. So look for more information coming soon. And thanks again for your time today.